Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Delaware County Board of Elections Board meeting for November 14th, 2023. Please rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic that stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. It appears Mr. Alberts is online and he can hear us and we can hear him. So, Mr. Alberts, if you have any comments, don't feel that you shouldn't put yourself out there so that we can find out what you would like to say. First order of business is, Mr. Allen, is the consideration of the agenda. Would you please review that with us and pay particular attention to announcing the matters for action?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Board of Elections. First, we'll have public comments. Then I will be giving a report to the board on the overview of the election. Then it's open for board member comments. If there are any observations you want to make as far as the election went, how the election went. Next, the consideration of recommendations on provisional ballots and consideration of any objections to the staff's recommendations on provisional ballots. That is a public hearing, and for that reason, we have a court reporter here today. Next, we are going to be asking you to authorize our staff or myself to sign the unofficial election results that need to be filed to the Department of State. That is an action item. Next, campaign finance waiver requests. We have 3 to present to you. Poll worker pay consideration. This is a minor item involving what we're allowed to do in the event that a poll worker, unlike most of our poll workers who overperform, given what they're paid, completely underperforms. The status report on any potential recounts and the next meeting date and approval of the minutes. We don't have any to be approved today.
Thank you. So we'll start with public comment. There's 3 minutes for public comment. If anybody would like to make public comment, they should come and say their name and their address, and then they're welcome to make it. Is there any public comment this morning? All right, then, Mr. Allen, could we please have the Director of Elections report?
Madam Chair, I'm pleased to report that we had one of our most successful elections, and we had that while we were introducing new technology in approximately 40% of our precincts. We introduced the electronic poll books or poll pads, and we couldn't do any of this without the dedication and service of our poll workers. We introduced this at 166 precincts, which meant our poll worker coordinator, Pam Lairson, and her team had to put together an elaborate system to sign up poll workers from the 260 odd precincts that were not receiving poll pads at this election, and a separate poll pad inclusive training session for the 166 precincts. Obviously, some judges didn't know, or other poll workers didn't know, and they would sign up for the other one. And so there were a lot of phone calls and emails and communications, and some who were not in poll pad precincts indicated they wanted to take that training anyway. They wanted to see what was coming, and they came. There was a lot of enthusiasm, especially there was some apprehension by some people who came into the training, but by the end of the training, they realized all of the benefits of the technology. The devices speed up the check-ins. They make instructions to voters more consistent, very consistent, from precinct to precinct and from voter to voter, depending on all the situations that it covers. They give the correct voting address to voters who arrived at the wrong part of the building or at the entirely wrong polling site. The poll workers love the poll pads. We're going to work with the county. We were going to work toward trying to achieve approximately 2/3 coverage in the primary, but the feedback we've received has been entirely positive. And we think we should move to make the next election less complicated by not having this. Some have it and others don't. And we've received encouragement from the county that we should pursue 100% coverage at the primary, which we think would be great, because then there would be no new precincts, new poll pad precincts at the presidential election. This project was a success story that involved all elements of our operation: the warehouse, voter registration, who helped do the logic and accuracy on it, and the Bureau of Elections. Most importantly, this allows for a whole lot more transparency in terms of who participated. We finished in 3 hours downloading the voter history from the 166 precincts. Mrs. Winterbottom could tell you how long it takes to go through paper poll books and scan individually the little barcodes next to each voter whose signature was filled out on election day by the voter. And it takes weeks. It's almost never done before we certify the elections. I think it's always done probably like a week or two after. And here we are, less than 3 days after election day, we had all of that material downloaded from the 166. And I think with 5 more staff, we could handle all 428 precincts and have that done by the Friday after election day. And then it's a matter of waiting for the Department of State. So I left out from there our IT liaison, and I shouldn't, Rob Wright. He was instrumental in making sure that we had the testing, the training poll pads rather, ready to go, as well as all of the election day poll pads. And then a plan to have some of them be used in training and election day. So we're really excited about how that went. And Crystal is already mapping out and measuring for the shelving units that are going to go in her office to hold all 500 poll pads. Next, we had a super smooth drop-offs thanks to the repeat of the plan that Gene Flechute and others rolled out last May. This is when the poll workers come in, converge at the government center, and we're in and out in about 10 minutes. That contrasts dramatically to the COVID days of pulling up to tents and cars, and no matter how we tried, that did not go real quickly for the poll workers. We had no equipment or ballot issues that delayed voting. We had to replace a couple of pieces of equipment, but there was nothing in the way of a technology glitch or a printing error that caused ballots not to scan. We had a couple of polling places open late, one because of a worker showing up late, and one because of the facility contact not showing up to open the doors. We had an effective response to a police emergency. I want to recognize the warehouse team, the Bureau, our chair, who went out to the site to make sure everything went smoothly, the Sheriff's Department, and the courts, who approved an emergency order to extend hours at that one location. I also want to recognize the judge of election at Radnor 2-2, the recipient of the 2 precincts at the last minute, Jeff Farley. He worked to accommodate the incoming 2 precincts at Radnor Elementary. And I need to add to my contingency plan a phone call to that individual. So we had everything else covered with the media, the political parties, the public notice, persons to redirect the voters. But I never thought to put on there, I ought to call the polling place that's going to receive these 2 precincts unexpectedly. So I want to thank him. In terms of the drop boxes, I still want to pursue reducing the number of that we have after this election. But we had minimal problems with the cameras. We did a lot of preventive maintenance ahead of time, and we finally conquered the the problems that we've had repeatedly at Swarthmore and Marple libraries, and it was flawless throughout the whole cycle. We had timely reporting of results. And lastly, most gratifying are the many notes of praise that we've received from the poll workers and the party leaders who say the elections in Delaware County are getting smoother and smoother. And it's a credit to everybody who on this team who really works hard, works long hours, and to try to make this come together. So it bears repeating that we have the best election team in the United States. Thank you.
I like to say the world, but we'll stick with the United States. Thank you, Mr. Allen. You know, I want to just, I won't take too long, and I just want to say a couple things. It was an incredibly smooth election. I'm so proud of all of us and all of the work that all of you do every day on our team to make it happen. And the best example of that, it was noted, I think, by Mr. Allen rightfully, and of all the people that should be thanked, but we had a major, you know, contingency plan situation, right? I mean, 2 precincts were shut down in the middle of an election right before the evening rush. And we were up and running within an hour. The court had extended the voting by an hour. I actually said to Mr. Allen, I said, wait, you just said that we have the extra hour. Do we really already have it? And that court order came out so fast that the people who were evacuated and coming to the new site were immediately told, you can wait while we get it up and running, which by the way, didn't take very long, thanks to the warehouse staff being amazing. Or you could come back before 9. And we were able to say that the moment they needed to hear it. And so we didn't lose any voters that showed up at the backup precinct. And the Joe, he's right. The Joe who received him, I think, was a little shell shocked. You know, here comes 2 precincts moving into his location. He's like, what is happening? And then after about 5 minutes, he said, how can I help? And he helped the Joe that had was running those 2 precincts, and they just did an incredible job. So, but that's because the planning. It's really nice to know that you have planning. It's nice to know that the planning really works, and it's just the thoughtfulness of all of you on our team. So I go with the best in the world, but certainly the best in the country. And then so excited about the e-poll books. If you think we can roll them out in the primary, I just think that for everybody's sake, that will be so much better next year than doing it in the general of a presidential. So, and I think that's also a tribute to the incredible training and work that our team does. So I'm not going to name everybody's names. I mean, but I just want you to all know that thank you for standing proud for Delco and showing the world that we are really able to run incredible, fair, free, consistent with the law elections in our county. I couldn't be prouder. So I'll let Mr. McLean and then Mr. Alberts say anything that they want to say, but my main words are just thank you.
Madam Chair, I just echo your comments. It was a smooth election day. I was able to get to a couple dozen polling places, visit there during the day. In terms of the electronic poll books, all of the workers liked them. The only negative comment I had was from a very senior citizen worker, and she admitted that they work fine. She just doesn't like anything new. You know, but they worked wonderfully, and the staff at the wharf on election night worked terrifically to process everything, and our IT department to get those results up onto the website. There is a tremendous amount of work that goes on in the background. There are literally hundreds of people that work to get it there. But we're cognizant of the fact that if you're out there sitting at your house or at some place for taking your returns, your window into our world is through the website and having those results posted. And so I think they did just a terrific job this year in getting them up in a timely manner. They're there. And then I want to thank Mr. Allen and his staff that inevitably after the election, you get questions from constituents, and he's been able to he and his staff been able to guide me through any questions that I didn't know the answer to. So I just want to thank everybody. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Alberts.
Yeah, I just want to echo the praise for the staff and the training. And in my experience, traveling to various precincts throughout the county, things were uniformly working smoothly inside. There were a few, raised voices and kerfuffles outside, as there often are when competitive elections are happening, but nothing that rose to, an inappropriate degree from what I could tell. the main feedback I would have, just as we fine tune the electronic poll pad training process, is to make sure people are prepared for the inevitable troubleshooting that will happen with anytime you have a printer involved. And that caused a few panic moments, but people worked through those very well. And then there was one polling place where they didn't quite understand that having everyone check in at one table would lead to the most efficient result. So if we have polling places like that, we just make sure people are prepared to make the most out of the tools they're given. But this is going to, people are going to be thrilled to have these arrive at their polling places, those that have not already had them. They really do make a difference. So great job, everyone. Thank you.
And Mr. Allen, I know that the Joe of elections for the 2 precincts that moved has been out of the country, so we haven't gotten to properly thank her, but I know you will when she comes home, because she was outstanding in how she handled that situation with calm and cool and collective and everything you could possibly want a Joe to do under those circumstances. So
You're right. When I first got her on the phone, right after the evacuation, she was not, she was all about, okay, what next? Very calm, very deliberate, and, not at all argumentative or anything like that. Just wanted to know how we were going to proceed from there. So that was gratifying as well.
yeah, she was fabulous. All right, so here we are to the consideration of recommendations on provisional ballots and consideration of any objections to recommendations. And I believe we have one objector presentation and then perhaps some witness statements. So do we want to start? How do we want to start this? I want to make this
With Crystal Winterbottom giving the recommendations, the overview of the provisional ballots, of how many we had, how many we unofficially, before you vote, determined should be full counts, meaning every valid vote on the ballot would be counted. Which ones should be partial counts, meaning the person perhaps voted in the wrong precinct was eligible to vote and may, for example, be eligible to vote for statewide offices or countywide offices, but not their ward or precinct, or perhaps even a school region director's office. So that we have to transfer the valid votes from that ballot for that one precinct to only the votes that voter is eligible to receive. And finally, the no counts, where the voter was determined to be ineligible to cast a provisional ballot on election day.
Good morning, Crystal Winterbottom, Chief Clerk of Voter Registration.
Crystal, before you start, do you agree with what he said about the poll books being so fast in 3 hours?
Oh, yeah. So I wasn't part of downloading it, but we are just today are starting our manually barcoding each page of whoever signed the poll book at the polls. So that does take weeks. Every single page we have to make sure we go through, and then we double check, make sure that we scan the same amount to the public count and make sure we didn't miss any, because there's times that pages can get stuck together, or maybe we put the wrong book in the wrong spot. So we have a lot of checks and balances for that too. And yes, that takes weeks.
So you're a fan of the e-poll book?
Oh yeah, and so right now, so we're minus what is it, 166 precincts that we have them in bags in our poll book slots, that if they weren't unlocked, because we did have them zip tied, that we know that we don't have to go through each page to make sure that they didn't use it. Nobody had called us to use the poll books, but yes, that makes it go a lot faster.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to point out, we did have the paper poll books as a contingency if there was a massive or long-term power outage and the printer isn't able to work, and the poll pads somehow failed to operate. We did have the paper poll books as a backup in every precinct. We did seal it shut though for the reason Crystal said.
Yeah, I think that's a great backup plan, but I'm glad we didn't have to use it.
We still print them, we still bind them, we still pack them. So that part's still the same, but after election, yes, it would take weeks for us to go through. I think there's about 900 to 1,000 books for all 428 precincts. We would go through every single one.
All right, thank you.
So provisionals, we had a total of 859 provisionals cast. 47 of those are challenged. So if you take out those 47, I recommend to fully count 620. 55 would be partially counted, and on the provisional envelope, we put what was in common and what shouldn't be counted that wasn't in common, and 137 no counts. The 137 consist of the voters not signing both boxes. It also consists of no secrecy envelope. It consists of voters registered in a different county, not registered at all. But those were the majority of the no counts. The 47, we had recommended no count because they did not have a Joe signature or minority signature or both. Those are listed on the challenge sheet, and there's 47 of those.
For the 137 no counts, obviously if a voter's not registered somewhere else, that's different. But for the voters not signing both boxes or no secrecy envelopes, if we could just identify what precincts they were and follow up with the Joes, that really is something that should be caught.
Yes, so we 137 out of all the boxes behind me is just one smaller box. So yes, that's and they're all in precinct order. So we would get that list together and then communicate with Pam, our poll worker coordinator, and let her know those issues we saw with the provisionals. And we do the same thing with poll books too.
Yeah, I mean, we have no discretion, right, on the signatures, Mr. Parks.
That's correct. There's a controlling appellate court precedent in Pennsylvania saying you need both signatures. That's also been decided before the appellate court ruling at the Delaware County Court of Common Pleas level. So we've been following that rule since the Court of Common Pleas here decided it that way.
And then on the secrecy envelopes?
Yeah, that's similarly, absolutely. That's from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court dating back a couple of court cycles. But those are both relatively recent rulings. I mean, they're not 50 years old. They're more like
Together, right? But I just want to make sure that, I mean, that's just those are things that we want not to happen.
right. One other quick point I would note is that the process that you requested with the follow-up to the poll worker training person, we've actually been doing that for a number of election cycles so that we can get that feedback back to poll workers and, sensitize them to errors they might be making. And I think we're seeing a consistent improvement over time in these types of, unforced errors, I will call them, where an active board of, local poll workers, an active judge of elections can stop a problem before it happens or catch it before it ends up in front of us and becomes a no count because the court decisions don't allow it to count.
Right, and it is so easy, and it can be on the voter. I mean, when we were at the Radnor backup location, a couple times the voter misses a box, and then the Joe has to run and say, "Hey, come back," and you can lose somebody that way too. So just the more we can do to catch it, I think that's helpful. I know we're going to get to the challenged votes, but did you have any questions for Ms. Winterbottom, Mr. Flynn?
No, I don't.
Mr. Alberts, do you have any questions for Ms. Winterbottom?
I have none.
Okay. Before, thank you, Ms. Wynn.
Yes.
Would you, Mr. Parks, would you
In
like
the
to?
past, our process has been to entertain a motion to accept the recommendation of voter registration with respect to the unchallenged provisional ballot. And then we would move on to consideration of the challenge. And I would recommend we continue to do that. It just kind of clears the table and makes it clear what's left for consideration. And we don't end up having a big, long discussion about the challenged ones and then forget to adopt the recommendation as to all the unchallenged ones too. So let's do that.
That's a good process. Do we have a motion?
Madam Chair, I move to accept the recommendations of the voter registration office for the unchallenged provisional ballot.
And Mr.
Second.
Alberts, do you want to second that?
Seconded. Yes.
I was going to relieve you of that just in case you were nervous about doing it from remotely. But thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any need for discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
None opposed, that motion passes. Thank you. And, Mr. Parks, do we want to, thank you, Ms. Winterbottom.
I was gonna, speak of the 47 challenge, there would be, if it was decided from a no count to count it, it would be 45 full counts and 2 partial counts.
Thank you.
The highlighted yellow ones,
Yes.
partial counts.
Yes.
Oh, good, thank you. I thought there might be something else. Had the wrong guess. Thank you. All right, I'm just wondering whether or not we should hear from Ms. Chauncey or Mr. Parks if you wanted to make any preliminary statements about the issues.
It may be useful, given that the challenges all relate to missing signatures by one or both members of the poll working team. And by way of a refresher, the form here includes a place for the judge of elections to sign and a place for the minority inspector to sign. And I thought it might be useful to start with just me reading to you guys the relevant code section on this. There are actually 2 code sections. I think that will at least set the parameters for you to hear the evidence and may be useful background. The code section is 25 PS 3050. And in section 5A41, it reads, at all elections, an individual who claims to be properly registered and eligible to vote at the election district, but whose name does not appear on the district register, that's what we call the poll book, and whose registration cannot be determined by the inspectors of election or the county election board, shall be permitted to cast a provisional ballot. Individuals who appear to vote shall be required to produce proof of identification pursuant to subsection A, and if unable to do so, shall be permitted to cast a provisional ballot. So that's a different category. Those are people who, there's a question about identification. They need, maybe they're a first-time voter and they don't have their identification. Those folks also can cast a provisional ballot. An individual presenting a judicial order to vote shall be permitted to cast a provisional ballot. So that's a third category. Prior to voting the provisional ballot, the elector shall be required to sign an affidavit. And this, by the way, is now subsection 2. Prior to voting the provisional ballot, the elector shall be required to sign an affidavit stating the following, and then it reads what the voter affidavit language is. Then below that, it says signature of voter elector, current address, check the reason for casting the provisional ballot, signed by the judge of elections and minority inspector. After that, point 3, or item 3 in this section, after the provisional ballot has been cast, the individual shall place it in the secrecy envelope, and then it goes forward about what happens. Skipping ahead. In section, again, 25 PS 3050, 5 Romanet 1, except as provided in some class Romanet 2. If it is determined that the individual was registered and entitled to vote at the election district where the ballot was cast, the County Board of Elections shall compare the signature on the provisional ballot envelope with the signature on the elector's registration form, and if the signatures are determined to be genuine, shall count the ballot if the County Board of Elections confirms that the individual did not cast any other ballot, including an absentee ballot in the election. Romanet 2. If a provisional ballot shall not be counted if A, either the provisional ballot envelope under clause 3 or the affidavit under clause 2 is not signed by the individual. And that's the 2 voter signatures that were referenced earlier. B, the signature required under clause 3 and the signature required under clause 2 are either not genuine or are not executed by the same individual. Again, that references the voter signatures. C, a provisional ballot envelope does not contain a secrecy envelope. D, in the case of a provisional ballot that was cast under subsection A21 Romanet 1 within 6 calendar days following the election, the elector fails to appear before the County Board of Elections to execute an affirmation, or the County Board of Elections does not receive an electronic facsimile or paper copy of an affirmation affirming under penalty of perjury that the elector is the same individual who personally appeared before the district court board on the day of the election and cast a provisional ballot and the elector is indigent and unable to attain proof of identification without payment of fee. So that relates to voters who need to vote provisionally because of a lack of ID. Subsection E is similarly relates to lack of ID. And F is the elector's absentee ballot or mail-in ballot is timely received by a county board of elections. So those are the categories under which the code directs that provisional ballots may not be counted. So I would note, there is language in 3050 specifically stating, quote, signed by judge of elections and minority inspector, unquote. Now, it doesn't say the judge of elections shall sign, the minority inspector shall sign, but it just has this very strange sort of listing of what I would call language that would be on the form. Second, I would note that in the categories of provisional ballots not being counted, it does not list failure to contain a signature.
Am I supposed to get this?
I don't
It's
think
never
so.
happened.
I would ignore that. It does not include lack of a signature of an election official. Although having no signatures of election officials does probably raise as an evidentiary question the authenticity of the provisional ballot. And I think that's a matter properly for this board to consider upon hearing the evidence. What I would take away from the language I just read you is that the matter of whether to accept provisional ballots that are missing one or both signatures is a matter for the good judgment of this board upon the evidence presented in the hearing.
Any questions for Mr. Parks or?
Question for Ms. Winterbottom.
Oh, okay.
I believe the number we have is 47 that are challenged for the reason that we just discussed. In your office's review of the provisional ballots, were you able to compare the signature on the envelope for the provisional ballot with the voter's registered signature for the voter registration?
So for all provisionals, we go into the Shore system as part of the review and we do print screens for each of those provisionals that has the voter record. It would have their name, their address, their date of birth, their signature, all that. So we would know if someone else signed it or something, like if it was completely different name, if that's what you're
I think
asking.
Mr. Park put his finger. The issue we have, of course, the authenticity of it, since we didn't have, if you want to look at it, both sides sign the envelope. But I'm just saying, for the public, as part of the process of processing the provisional ballots, we do look at the signature that we have on file for the voter and compare it to the signature that is on the envelope. And if they don't match, presumably somebody holds it or raises a question.
Yeah, so if one of my guys in the office had a question like this, that always comes up. Is this person? Because there's a lot of people, voters in Delaware County that have the same name and even same birthday. So to determine who that is, yes, that those questions come up a lot. Yes, and we would look at the signature. We would also look at past forms and to see if something was similar to someone's S in the signature from years ago. So yes, that does come up.
So if the signatures did not appear to correlate, if they didn't appear to be the same signatures, that would be flagged or pulled out or.
Yes,
rejected
that
for some
would be
other
a question. Yes.
No, I think that's good. I mean, I think what we didn't ask you, because I'm used, I know what you do, but maybe to be clear is you ran all these provisional ballots through all the checks to make sure that the person was registered, obviously, because you found some that weren't, that they were in the right district, that to Mr. McLean's point, that the voter signature appeared to be consistent with their voter registration file. All of the checks that you would do is, so the question here is really about what to do about the minority and majority, the Joe and the minority inspector's signature, right? There's not a
Yes.
concern about the voter that you've
Nope.
identified.
This is the only reason on these 47. That's correct.
Yeah, I would just add also, more for the record and for the public's benefit, the process we use for this, as Crystal mentioned, we do a print screen of the voter registration record, and we actually attach that to the envelope with the provisional ballot in it. Thus, anyone who's reviewing these provisional ballots and preparing potential objections has the benefit of what the signature looks like in our system, as well as seeing the signature on the outer envelope. So that's also that creates another level. It's, Crystal's team looks at it, but the information is publicly available during the provisional ballot processing process so that members of the parties, candidates can also review that.
Well, we've had challenges to those before. In fact, we had one
Yeah.
hearing where there were a lot of challenges to the signatures, and some people had changed their names in their mind, but maybe not on their voter registration. And
Yes.
so, okay, but none of that, no, those are not that issue
No.
here.
And some of the signatures, so on the main voter record that some might see, or the same signature in the poll book, if they don't appear, these original forms go all the way back to the 70s. So you see the 3 Dieboldts in our office have original forms from years ago. The ink, sometimes when you scan it, doesn't go through and doesn't show, but we have the good part of the Shore system is that we scan each document. And sometimes we have to refer to original documents, even make a copy and you can see, how they write their street name. But yes, that does happen time to time. But these 47 are just the Joe and minority signature, and the voter is registered. The 2 were not in the correct precinct that they were registered, which would make them a partial count if this were to change.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, good question. Mr. Alberts, did you have any questions while she's on this? Up here? No. Thank you. You may be called again. I can't promise you. So I see where you're.
I have none.
Sorry, Mr. Alberts, I cut you off.
I was just saying I have none.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Chauncey.
Thank you very much for entertaining these challenges today that we have. I just want to note a couple of things before I begin. Number one, these challenges are made without consideration of party affiliation of the voter and without consideration of party affiliation of the poll workers or the election officials that were there that day. They are also made without consideration that any of these provisional ballots will affect any of the races that are in close proximity. It's my understanding that that is not the case at all, that none of these ballots, whether they count or don't count, will have an effect on any of the races that need to be certified. To start off with, I do have quite a few witnesses in here today. They are all judges of elections in various precincts across the county. There may be one minority inspector, yes, here. And I also, additionally, for those that I was able to make contact with, some of them were not able to be present today, but they have sent me separate emails that I'm happy to provide to the board that states their process for executing the provisional ballots, as well as whether they believed it was a fault of their own or a fault of the voters. And I did want to just reiterate for Mr. Parks, when he read the statute, that I would agree with him that in the first section of 5A2, when it says signed by judge of elections and minority inspector, that is at the bottom of the affidavit that the voter has to sign. So I don't necessarily believe, I mean, obviously this section it's not clear of the statute. It's pretty ambiguous. Are they citing the form or are they citing what is required under the statute? And I would go further to say that with regards to 5.1 as well as 2, where it states when the provisional ballot should not be counted, it makes it very clear to me, and it's very unambiguous, that these ballots should be counted absent registration issues. If they are duly registered in the county and the signatures are matched, then the board shall count those provisional ballots. With that being said, I do have the list. Miss Winterbottom was kind enough to provide the list to me, so we were operating on the same thing. I did want to point out that of these 47, and Ms. Winterbottom may have a different count, but I went in yesterday again just to count for sure. Of the 47, 37 of those ballots were attempts to cure by the voter. So this is that voter's second attempt to cast a ballot. And it's our position that but for the lack of the minority inspector or the judge signature, that vote would have counted. I did want to address a very quick issue as well regarding the authenticity of the ballots. This year, we did something that we've never done before. We did not have printed paper provisional ballots at the precincts that were readily available for anyone to come up to the table and grab by mistake or cast a ballot without any board member knowing. In order for a voter to cast a provisional ballot, a poll worker, and 9 times out of 10, it was the judge of elections who were the ones facilitating the provisional ballots. The poll worker had to use a code that was provided to them by the Board of Election or machine warehouse. Forgive me, I don't know who actually makes up that code. And go to the touch writer machine. They have to initially set up the touch writer machine, punch in their poll worker code, and begin the process so that the voter can either cast their ballot on the touch writer or print out a blank ballot and then go separately to vote it and then come back to the judge of elections. That is a process that guarantees that a poll worker must be involved before a voter can cast a provisional ballot. And if the poll worker, the provisionals are not going to scan on the ballot, so they didn't just cast a provisional ballot and then walk over and scan it. In order for their vote to be counted or even considered, they have to go back to the poll worker who put in the code and got them started to complete the forms and fill out the paperwork, put them in the secrecy envelope and seal everything up. So that is a significant checks and balances that we haven't had in the past that I think is imperative in considering this.
I apologize for interrupting, but just also to make sure the record's clear on this, the envelope and the secrecy envelope, the outer envelope and secrecy envelope are also both supplied by a poll worker. They're in the possession of the poll workers. That's not something that the voter would have independently of receiving it from the local poll workers at the precinct.
That's correct. So I have, with those few points in consideration, I have multiple poll workers here today that are willing to state the process that they went through in assisting voters with a provisional ballot. And it is my belief that they are prepared to state that the lack of minority signature or a judge of election signature is completely at the fault of the poll workers through human error. There's no malintent, and that the voter should not be penalized because of their mistake. I just want to go in order that I have them on here. I believe that are also on the list that you have. Some of them I have emails which I can address and pass up to the board when I get to them. I believe the first one I have is Upper Darby 17, Rachel Moore. You here? No, forgive me, I have an email for her, sorry. And I have 3 copies. I've highlighted the Upper Darby 17 on the top. Would you like me to read it into the record or?
Yes.
Okay. So I sent a mass email out to all of the judges of elections and I attempted to call most of them. We had a team that were attempting to call them. And this was in response to an email that I sent. I'll simply read what I said so the record is clear that I didn't persuade anybody. If you are receiving this email, it is because one or more provisional ballots in your precinct was deemed invalid because it was missing a Joe or minority inspector signature. I have challenged the board's decision to not count these ballots. However, a statement is required regarding the circumstances surrounding how these ballots were processed in the precinct. If you are able to be present at the Board of Election meeting, I gave them the location. Your presence would be appreciated. If you are unable to attend, please respond to this email with the process and steps you followed when processing provisional ballots. In particular, why provisional ballots may be missing one of the required signatures. And then I thank them for their cooperation. So this email I received last night at 7:24 p.m. from Rachel Moore, who is the judge of elections of Upper Darby 17. She responds, "Hi, Shelley. Oh no, I'm so sorry about that. I think what happened was at the time we had a provisional, the clerk was on break and the minority was checking folks in. I was working with the provisional. I had the individual use the touch writer for their provisional, put the code in and marked it as provisional before they started. They put it in a small envelope, sealed it, put it in the larger envelope and sealed it, filled out the envelope. I was pretty sure I signed it, but most likely was waiting for the minority to be available to sign it. Since it's obviously not done correctly, I missed something there and forgot to have the minority sign it. I'm so sorry I messed up. I hope you can relay this error." And so again, I'm passing this up to the board. And in that her precinct, Upper Darby 1-7, it was missing the minority signature. Sure, yes. What do we do? Challenger 1? C1. The next precinct that I have, someone available or an email from is Concord 5. That's Mr. John Schoenberger. Can you stand up, Mr. Schoenberger? How would you like me to proceed? Would you like me to ask him questions? Would you like him to make a statement about his process? How would you?
I think it'd be up to him if he's prepared to make a statement. I don't know that we need to go through a formal Q&A.
I
Okay,
agree. The rules of evidence don't govern this proceeding. It's your good judgment.
If you're comfortable making a statement, I would love for you to come forward and just announce yourself for the record and repeat where you're the Joe and.
I'm the Joe in Concord 5, okay? On that day, I think I had 8 provisionals, all right? This one envelope, I failed somehow to have signed the bottom. It was signed by the minority inspector, but not by myself. The normal process is to go find out, go to the machine, find out if someone wants to use the machine or not, okay? I printed out a ballot for this particular person who was there because she had received a letter to come and cure a ballot because she had made an error when she did a mail-in.
And are we talking about Sylvia Yost?
Beg your pardon?
Sylvia Yost?
Yes,
the
Sylvia
one-
Yost.
Okay.
Okay.
And you said, sorry, we don't have on that one either your signature or the minority inspector's signature.
There's no minority there either?
No.
Oh, wow.
So, well, let me go through this, because it's really important to understand. Do you have specific memory of Miss Yost?
I
casting
have
those-
specific memory of Miss Yost. She's a neighbor. We're all in a senior community together, so
Okay, so you have reason to, you know her and
I know her well. And as a matter of fact, by mistake yesterday, she passed me in the hall, said, "Thank you for helping me on election day." I did not have it in my heart to say to her, well, I may not have told you on election day.
but you assisted her with the process of casting the provisional
I did.
personally?
Right.
And obviously there was a mistake, we'll say. I mean, it's a tough, long day. So we really appreciate your service and no one's,
The last time I thought I was perfect, I was 6 years of age.
All right, but on this one, you have a specific memory of completing the process with Miss Yost, and if there's a mistake on the signatures,
Yeah,
Is that-
that, I don't know. Oh, we had a number of people at the same time, but I don't know. And I'm going to excuse myself. An error is an error.
right. No, I appreciate that because you coming here today is going to, personally, I can tell you from my position, and I haven't said my positions yet on these things or my preliminary positions because I want to hear all the evidence. It makes a very big difference to me. If you personally remember processing Sylvia Yost's provisional ballot, if there was an error on it due to an error of someone on the Board of Elections, and I appreciate your candor and willingness to accept responsibility for that. Is that what I hear you saying? That's what happened.
You know, my big concern is that a procedural error will now become substantive error, and she will be disenfranchised. That's my concern, and that's why I'm here this morning.
I greatly appreciate that. I don't have any other questions. I just want to see if Mr. Alberts, do you have any questions? I can tell you right now that your testimony here today is going to make a difference, certainly for me.
Yeah,
I really
I do
appreciate.
not have any questions, but I do appreciate the Judge of Elections commitment to coming here today.
Okay,
So thank you.
all right.
thank you, John.
Thank you.
Next I have, the Judge of Election in Concord 9 and 10, Linda Holobowicz. You can come up, Linda.
And are you comfortable following the same process? And I don't know if the court report, do you need help with that name or do you have? Okay, thank you.
Holobovich. Linda Holobovich. I'm the Joe for Concord.
I'm a Lunkenhauer, so I just. wanna
And
make sure.
Concord 10.
Thank you.
So I do specifically, I don't know what signatures were missing out of Concord 9 and Concord 10.
Not both the Joe and minority signature on both.
Okay, so I believe on Helen Struckman of Concord 10, that person came in very late at the 7:58 at the end of the night, and she thought she was in a different precinct. I believe that I had to call the registration, and they did say that she was not in that precinct. She was not registered in that precinct, but she was allowed to make a provisional ballot vote. And I helped her at the touch writer, gave her printed out a ballot, and then she proceeded to fill that out and put everything in the envelope and seal it up, fill it out. And I believe at the end of the night, because we were shutting everything down, I took it, thanked her, put everything back, and I believe it was a mispart on my half that I did not sign it and I didn't get the Joe to sign it.
You were the Joe, correct?
I was the Joe.
The
For,
minority, you didn't get the minority.
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get the minority signature and I forgot to sign. And for Concord 9, okay, Teresa Rawa, I know her personally. She is the mother of one of my child's friends. So I do know that I was talking to her. I believe after I was talking to her, because we were like reminiscing of our kids graduating together, that when she was leaving, I also got called to the other district, other precinct, and I'm sure that was a mistake on my part that I didn't sign it and then bring it back to the minority Joe. So I do recognize both of those names.
Well, thank you. I really, first of all, I appreciate your service, and
Thank you.
having done it myself, I know how long and hard of a day that is, right? And so, and it is a little, 2 precincts, so you served, you
We
were
got a
double
lot of
served.
steps that day.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I also, understand the community aspect, and
Yeah.
we want polling people to come in and be part of that community because it encourages them to come back and vote again. So,
Yeah.
so what I hear you saying, and not to make it sound critical, but is that these mistakes were on you, but you have specific memories
They
of
were.
these 2 voters casting their provisional ballots, and you're familiar with them.
I do, yes.
Okay, that's
Correct.
very helpful. I don't have any other questions, Mr. McLean.
The question I have, maybe Ms. Winterbottom, is since Ms. Struckman was not in Concord 10, is she in another Concord district where it's just gonna be a poll count anyway?
No, so that is one that we did not put partial on the list, so that's 3 partials. That voter is registered in a media borough and voted in the Concord Township. So that is the 3rd one.
So that'll be
Apologize.
partial.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Alberts?
I have no questions.
I'm learning to be patient because otherwise I will talk over him, and that's not great for the court reporter. So thank you very much for your service, and thank you for coming forward again. As I said to the previous Joe, it's really, for me, it's particularly significant when you don't have the Joe and the minority signature, because I'm not sure that without your testimony that I would count that vote. So I do appreciate that you came in. That's my view. We haven't taken a vote as a collective yet, but
Yeah, and my procedure with those is after I sign it, I take it immediately over to the minority. So I think because of the sheer fact that I forgot to sign it first, I didn't do that
right,
second.
that makes sense.
So thank you.
Thank you.
And I also want to you're good, Linda. I also want to point out that Concord's 9 and 10 are across the library from each other at the Garnet Valley High School. So one is on this side and one is over there. And so as serving for Joe for both of those precincts, she's constantly running back and forth between the 2. So it makes it easy for a mistake like this to happen.
Well, maybe that's something that we should look into in terms of the physical setup.
You might get some pushback from them out in Concord
Okay.
because they like their spot out there.
All right. All right. Okay, as long as you're comfortable as the Joe of both, that you can monitor both. This not being the significant part there, being able to see what's happening, making sure there's an orderly process of both, being able to have good sight lines to everything. Okay.
That's correct. And I will say at least the both Linda and John have been, this was not their first time as Joe. Correct, Linda? Like they've done this before. So they know the procedures, they know what's required of them. And it was just an inadvertent error. The next one that I have I have an email from the judge who was not available, but I also have the minority inspector here, Kathy. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your last name. Wolschlager. Do you want to come up, Kathy? In the meantime, I will read Linda, the judge. It's Judge of Edgemont 1. I'm sorry. I will read her email into the record. Again, I sent the same email that I sent the previous one. She says, Shelley, I'm so sorry that you had to reach out to me regarding the 3 provisional ballots that had no minority signature. This was due to an administrative oversight on my part, and for that, I apologize. The process that I followed was providing the voters the ability to vote provisionally. They filled out their ballot and folded and placed their ballot in the green envelope in which I provided them a numbered receipt for their records. And a portion of that numbered receipt was placed on the sealed green envelope by the voter. The voter then filled out the large white envelope. Their vote should be counted as they placed their ballot in the green envelope, which was sealed. Wanted to double check. Yes. 1, 2, 3, and I'm passing that up to the board at 2 and 2. And Ms. Kathy, do you want to speak on if you remember the procedures?
And would you say spell your name into the record just so that we have it?
Kathy Wolschlager, WOHLSCHLAEGER.
I'm going to compete with you for length of name. I mean, this is.
I honestly thought I signed one of them. I think we had 3 provisional ballots, and I really thought I remembered that, but evidently it didn't happen, and I'm sorry about that. In the future, I will be sure to check them myself too, to be sure my signature's on all of them. And I do remember the last one came in, as this other woman attested to, at 2 minutes to 8 o'clock. And I know that our judge was very busy with her trying to get that all set up on the touch writer. And I was in the process of trying to count ballots and finish up my portion of the closing part. So I can see where that one would easily have missed the signature, but I'm really sorry about the others, and I really don't remember not signing them.
No.
Do you remember the voters coming in to cast their ballot?
I remember 2 of them, actually. I didn't see the other one.
You didn't see the
No,
third?
no.
And do you recall watching the judge of elections, Linda, assist those voters with coming in and casting their
I
ballot?
actually didn't. She's way over on the other side of the room, kind of behind the voter table. So I didn't see her in the process. Although I must have, either I or the other inspector checked in the book, and that's why the person ended up going to her. And during the day, I remember sending several people to her.
Okay.
I think the critical question is the absence of your signature is not a reflection of some
No.
statement that you didn't think that those votes should be
No,
counted.
no,
It's-
not at all. It was just human error.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. McLean,
Thank you so much.
Mr. Alberts,
I have no questions. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you.
And
And thank
you-
you for your service.
And you bring up a good point before I go to the next one that I wanted to address before I forget is through all of these, there are no allegations and there's no suspicion, at least on my part, from all of the people that I've spoken to, that any of these were anything more than human error. From what I understand, these were all simple mistakes. There wasn't an intentional effort to not sign them because they didn't believe that the voter was worthy of voting. It was just a simple mistake. So I just wanted to point that out. The next one I have is Haverford 7-2. Her name is Pamela Graziano. She is not present, but I do have an email from her. Hers is very simple, where she just stated, I believe my minority inspector did not sign the provisional ballot. She didn't add any other details, but just stating she believed that she didn't sign, and I would mark this as C3. The next one is Lansdowne 5, Pamela Polk, which is also an email. She responded to my email yesterday at 6:18 p.m. This is Pamela Polk, the Joe for the 5th precinct. I had 2 or 3 provisionals. The provisional votes were printed from the touch writer and the following steps were taken. Were placed in a secrecy envelope by the voters. The voter completed the applicable sections on the white and green envelope. The voter signed in section 2 and 4. I placed the barcode sticker on the envelope and I provided the voter with the receipt. Myself and the minority inspector, Jocelyn, signed the envelopes and they placed in the large white inspector. And I believe this was one, mine's down 5. They had multiple provisionals, if I remember correctly. However, this one was lacking a minority signature. I did want to point something out. Can you pull this one for me, Crystal? Yes. Thank you. When I reviewed this envelope yesterday, and I'll obviously pass it up for the board to see, it appears that there are 2 signatures on the same line. I don't know if that was an error, if they are actually 2 signatures, but I did want to point that out to the board. And the email from her, I'll mark as C4.
Yes, we're at C4.
Okay. The next one I have is Media West, which is James Ziegelhofer, otherwise known as Ziggy. I think most people know him. Ziggy has been a judge for a really, really long time, and he's been instrumental in assisting the Board of Elections with their training materials, and he actually assisted in developing the poll workers guide, correct?
Yeah.
And in assisting in training. So he's very familiar with what the judge of election is supposed to do. And in Media West, there were 4 provisional
Wait, I just want to
ballots.
pause. His service to our board and our county and our country cannot be overstated. So thank you.
So there were 4 provisional ballots in Media West that were, and all 4 were missing a signature. 3 of them were both Joe and minority, and 1 was the minority.
The process that I use at my precinct, I have a separate table set aside for all provisional voting. I found that this is a better process because as people come in, the 2 inspectors and the clerk have enough to do, and all of these provisional ballots, I had 6 provisionals, and 4 were because the voter applied for either a mail-in ballot or absentee and did not return it. And, especially didn't return. One person came in with just the ballot and the mailing envelope. And I sent him home. He's a neighbor. And, I asked him to get the envelope with the barcode. He went home. He couldn't find it. So all of these 4 were because of the fact that they had the vote provisional. The oversight on my part, I know the first one that I signed, and the minority inspector didn't sign. I know the process. I supplied the blank ballots because each person I asked, I explained that you can do it, but it would take you some time to navigate. And they all agreed. All of them said, yeah, let me just get out of here as soon as I can. I gave them a blank ballot, the secrecy envelope. They went over to the quad or the single. They filled out their ballot. I told them, bring it back in the secrecy envelope sealed, which they all did. Before they left, I had them sign block 1 and 2 of the envelope. Block 4 doesn't get signed until they bring the ballot back. Okay. I did all that. The first one, I went over to the minority inspector and she was busy, determining the voter that was standing there. And I said to Lisa, I'll be back. And also my elected minority inspector called me at 12 o'clock on Monday and she could not serve because of a family emergency. So I had to curbside my minority inspector. So after I got done that first, provisional ballot voter, I usually keep all of my envelopes at the table, which I did. And it was just an oversight on my part that I did everything else, having them sign block 1 and 2, providing the ballot, putting it in, sealing the ballot. But it was just an oversight on my part, especially at the end of the night when you have multiple tapes coming off the scanner. You only have 2 tapes coming off the touch writer that need to be signed, as well as the machine warehouse envelope, the minority inspector's envelope, the Bureau of Elections envelope. And I just did not, I just oversight on not signing those envelopes. So, I don't want to make my administrative oversight, the fact that these voters qualified with good intentions not have their ballot counted. So
Thank you. So as to the 4 voters in question, because you said that you had, I think, 6, or 8, whatever number you had, it was greater than that. Do you have familiarity? Do you have every reason to believe these voters came, they presented to you, you ran the process, and it's simply an error of omission by you and or your minority inspector?
yes.
Thank you for your service. Any questions? Mr. Alberts?
I have no questions. Thank you.
If you can make this mistake, then anybody can make this mistake.
Well, yeah,
You wrote the book.
yes.
It's a busy day. It's a hard day.
Yes, it was. And again, not having, and I'm not making any excuses, but having someone who at 6 o'clock in the morning when we show up, and I actually had given the individual who was going to be curbsided, I gave her a brand new election day guide and told her, just here's the section that you need to read. And she read it and she did a marvelous job at the table. But it was just my oversight in, hey, you need to sign it, and mine not.
I feel pretty confident that that would not be an oversight you would ever make again.
It will never happen. I might do something else.
Okay.
But
Nobody's perfect. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Always.
All right, the next one that I have is at Middletown 2-2, Ariel Cinco. Come on up, Ariel. And Middletown 2-2 had 1 ballot. It was missing both the Joe and the minority signature. Here's the name right there. Sophia.
Would you please introduce yourself and say your role in the board?
Hello, yes, my name is Ariel Senko, Senko. I served as the judge of elections for Middletown 2-2, in addition to my usual Middletown 2-3. I remember we had 2 female voters who elected to vote provisionally because they weren't able to vote normally. And we at our precincts, we were allowing them to choose whether we printed them a blank provisional or had them vote on the touch writer. And both of our provisional voters chose to have them printed out. So we did that. And I instructed them to fill out the top portion of the white envelope that they needed to sign. And then I gave them their ballot. And I told them I'd stay nearby, and I did. They filled out their ballot. I instructed them to put it in the green one. I used Scotch tape on both the green secrecy envelopes and the white ones to make sure that they stayed sealed. I filed the Mrs. Phillips white envelope into the larger envelope that the county collects without signing it. I work in customer service, and usually provisional voters are not happy that they do it provisionally because they're worried about, the different process. So I might have, I don't know if I realized then or not that I hadn't signed it. Or that the minority inspector hadn't either. The reason that we didn't catch it later in the evening was, I think, because I was going back and forth between two precincts, and I had put tally marks on the big white county envelope saying that there should be two provisional envelopes in the larger one. So someone from Middletown 22 might have just visually verified that there were two white envelopes in the bigger one. It said they're in there and not checked to see that the signatures were there. So I apologize, and I hope that Mrs. Phillips' votes will still be counted appropriately despite my failure to have them signed.
Well, thank you very much for your service, and two precincts is double duty. And I think, as you've heard, I mean, it's a tough day for everybody, and we really appreciate your service. I can tell you that your specific memory of Miss Phillips and her provisional ballot in the absence of the two signatures is going to be significant enough for me to vote in favor of counting her vote. So we haven't done the vote yet for the board, but I just want you to know that that's really important to me. And I'm really glad you came down here today, because I don't know that it would be able to be true, or that I would vote that way if it weren't for your testimony. So you've continued your service by being here today. So I really appreciate that. And don't be too hard on yourself. It's a tough day. We all make mistakes. Ziggy wrote the book. Okay, it happens, right? But I hope that this won't discourage you from continuing service. It's good. Mr. McLean, do you have any questions?
Go.
Mr. Albert? All right, thank you.
I do not.
Proceed. If I could just take a moment here, maybe more for the public than for anybody in the room, but folks like Ariel are obviously incredibly careful. I mean, to Scotch tape the envelopes, that's the level of detail that, we could only dream about having among our poll workers.
Yeah.
Everybody's capable of an oversight, and the very purpose of this hearing is to catch things like this and correct them. This is not being called to the principal. This is a forum to allow these mistakes to get corrected. We build a record, we give an evidentiary basis for the board to make an informed decision about counting these ballots. So, for those who are here, it takes a lot to step up and admit in public that you made a mistake. That's you're an extra points in my book for being a good human being, not only to have served and done such very challenging work over a very long day, but also to then come back in and say, I didn't do my job exactly right. That takes a ton. My hat's off to every single person who's in that boat. My hat's off to Shelley for, organizing this effort. I know it's not easy. I was in that boat one day back a while ago, and I know how much work goes into that just for the sake of trying to make sure people's votes count. And I just want to make sure the public knows this board and me and the solicitor's role of this board, we're not up here trying to find hurdles to throw in front of voters. What we're trying to do is apply the code in the best way we can based on the code and the case law so that there is a fair process. We're in a day and age when people really have questions and concerns about the electoral process in our county and in our country. And we don't do it any favors by sort of fast forwarding over the difficult details and the blocking and tackling of these parts of the election code. And unfortunately, it puts people like Ariel and Ziggy and those who've come here today in a tough personal position. But this is we're trying to balance, the consideration for our hardworking poll workers against the obligations of the code here. And unfortunately, in this particular scenario, the hardworking poll workers have to be asked to do a little bit more, like come to the hearing and admit to a mistake if they've made one. That's probably a little bit unfair, but that's what the law requires. And I just want to make sure people know that that's what's happening here. This is not some sort of public flagellation for the sake of, some evil-mindedness on a part of this board or on my part as solicitor.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. I want to echo that before I call the next person up, because I'm also a judge of elections on election day, and I got thrown to the wolves on my first day. It was the first primary after COVID hit, when we had the original new machines. The judge of elections had been there for like 20 years, and he decided he wasn't coming because of COVID and he couldn't risk it. And I, unfortunately or fortunately, was the only one who had taken the training on the new machines and the new process, and they basically said, tag, you're it. So to think that I didn't make a mistake would be, I'm sure I did. And I'm not a mathematician. I'm not an election official. I am a lawyer, so I can almost promise you there's been one or many mistakes that I have made. And I don't want any of the judges in this room today that I've called to be here to think that this is like Mr. Parks said, a public flogging. It is absolutely not. I think we're all here for the exact same reason, is we want every voter's vote to count, regardless of party affiliation. We want them to know that they exercised their duty and it was worth something. So I just want to make that very clear, that you're here as an assistant to me to help me make sure that these votes are counted. Next is Middletown 3-3, which is Ted Robb, who's here. And Middletown 3-3 had 2 provisionals that were lacking both the judge and the minority signature.
I'm Ted Robb, ROBB, known to the DMV and the Board of Elections as James Theodore Robb. Our process is...
Wait, are you the Joe?
I am.
Okay.
Yes. And have been for 2 or 3 years.
Thank you.
Someone comes in, they want to vote provisionally. I grab a green envelope and the white envelope, and the poll codes go over to the printer and print out the provisional ballot. And if you were looking for a way to improve the process, you got to touch the screen at least 16 times and probably 25 times. I should have counted.
I hear it's 13 pages worth.
Yeah, and if there could be just print provisional ballot,
We talked about that. I agree with you. That would be an improvement.
there should be an IT.
If I
wizard
could do it, we would.
Yeah.
I swear to you. But that's the way the equipment is certified. I don't know that there's short of getting new software that's certified by the federal government. I wish I could. I want desperately to be able to do that.
I only interrupted you to say we've really thought about that. That is bothersome. So thank you.
You write the checks, and that is a powerful thing. So for we had 7 provisional ballots in our district. 4 of them were residents with me at Granite Farms Estates. The 2 ballots, Mr. Voce and Mr. Reeves, are residents of Granite Farms Estates. I assisted each of them. The process is print out the ballot, give it to them, explain what has to happen, fold it up. I watch them put it in and fold it and put it in the green envelope, and then put it in the white envelope and seal it. And then when all that is done, I look at it to make sure it's okay. And we also put in the receipt that gets printed out by the machine. And I make sure everything's okay. I sign it, and then I take it to the minority inspector. The lack of the minority inspector's signature is in no way reflective on him. This is human error, and I am your human. At the end of the day, I go through the white envelope and say, okay, I know we had 7. Do we have 7? I put the receipts in front of them, except for the one that I couldn't find. I noted that on one of the ballots, I put the sticker on the Spanish side when all the writing was on the English side, and apparently that was accepted. So I know them both. I saw them fill out their ballots. I feel bad. If I had a suggestion, it would be, when you go through the envelope at the end of the day, check again for signatures. Although, given what happens after the polls close, that's all we need, another task to do after the polls close. So that's my story.
Well, I appreciate your candor. I appreciate your service. And it sounds like these two are specifically memorable to you, and you saw no other issue than human error on the behalf of yourself and the minority inspector. Actually, I think you took it
Only
all.
on me.
You
I'm-
took it all. You
Yep.
took it all on these ballots. I really appreciate that. It's significant, certainly to me in my view of this issue. Mr. McLean?
Yep.
Mr. Alberts?
I have none.
My next is Nether Providence 2-2, Michael Mayer. 2-2 had one provisional ballot that is challenged that was lacking a minority signature.
Good morning still, I think.
It is.
It's Mayor Mayer. And I am the judge of Nether Providence 2-2. I think this is going on 3 years, but I'm not sure. I do remember the provisional ballots. It is, I think the legal term is I screwed it up. You've heard it all already. You get busy, you forget, your minority inspector is busy doing something at the moment of the provisional. I do recall the provisional, the procedure was very similar to what you've heard. In my case, I usually sit the voter down and explain what a provisional is, what their choices are. In my case, the provisional, both provisional, I think it was 2 we had that day, which by the way, were the first 2 we had in 3 years. So this was new territory for me, but they both elected to vote on the touch writer, brought their ballots back, sealed them in the envelopes, went through the procedures. I was very concerned about them signing twice, making sure that was done, and I signed my name and put it in the envelope because it's an exposed ballot. I mean, I know it's sealed, but it's the only ballots we have that somebody could literally get to. So I usually put them in an area where they're not easy to tell where they are. But I agree. I think the procedural change for me will be that the first thing I'm going to do when the polls close is pull over provisional ballots, open them up and check for signatures, because that's a good time to get the minority inspector over to just sign it off, and then you can seal it all up and take care of it. But yeah, there was no malfeasance here. There was no question about the voter was, first of all, for me to withhold my signature based on a protest, I think is entirely inappropriate. That's your job. I'm just supposed to supply the filled out ballot.
I agree. I think that I personally
As do I.
think that it should be an active, I don't think
Right.
this voter is qualified or some sort
Right,
of
I can
statement, so we
protest
we
somebody's
can
vote
look
just
into it.
like
Right.
anybody else can, but withholding my signature is not appropriate. Or my minority inspector withholding their signature. So, but yeah, and I was also, like most of the judges here, appalled that somebody's vote wouldn't count because of something that I did exclusively. So hopefully the testimony that you heard today from all the others as well as myself will be the consideration to count the vote as legitimate, barring all other considerations.
Right, one, and those have been cleared by Mr.
Right.
Obama. So thank you very much for your time. I certainly is
Thank you.
significant to me. Mr. McLean, any questions?
Nope.
Mr. Alberts?
No.
Thank you very much.
My next person is Nether Providence 4-1, Tom Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher, there had 3 provisional ballots that were lacking minority signature.
You and Ziggy.
Served in the
What a-
Navy. I think there's something
I
to
know,
be
thank
said
you
here.
for all of your service.
Good morning, everyone. Before I begin, I'd just like to thank Mr. Allen and his crew and you as the board for the work they've done. I complimented specifically Pam the other day, Christine to Crystal right to her face. I appreciate everything you did, but I'm here to fall on my sword, so to speak. I screwed up. There is no other way to describe it. Last year, I'll put it in context, we had 34 provisionals. I signed them all, the minority inspector and signed them all. When a voter comes in, they explain to me that they don't have their ballot. I think all 3 were missing their absentee ballots. I take them over, I walk them through. I literally set up a table right next to the touch writer so that I can go back and forth and stay there and watch what they're doing, consistent with the secrecy binder. I know all 3 of these people. I was also a township commissioner. Many of these people have been in the township as long as I have. I started doing this when I had dark hair 18 years ago. There's no other explanation other than you've heard from the other judges what the work that is done. I messed up. I sit down with the people. I put the sticker on there. I check off why they're coming in to do provisionals. and it's right there, right in front of me, and I didn't sign it. And normally we just go right over to our minority inspector, who is a new minority inspector. The majority has always given me a little shot at the end of the night and said, let's go through these and sign them. I didn't get that prompt at the end of the night. And as my wife said, fall on your sword and have them fire you as judge of elections.
No.
And I
Getting
still,
off that easy.
No
I know.
way, no way.
So,
appreciate your-
uh,
There are a couple
Service
precincts in
here.
this county we don't have to worry about, and yours is one of them. So, sorry, you're still hired.
so I would like to thank Shelley for bringing us to my attention. I didn't sleep well last night, but if you're going to punish anybody or reprimand anybody, I stand here. Please don't hurt these three people. They went the extra effort. Each one of them came in and they couldn't find their absentee ballot. Of course, that drives me crazy that you can't find your absentee ballot, but I'm not here to holler at any person who loses their absentee ballot when it's sent to them. But you do what we do, and that's why we're there, and to solve any issues. And I thank you. If there's any questions.
Thank you for your service, Mr. McLean and Mr. Alberts.
Thank you.
All right, have a good day.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Tom. Okay, the next one, I believe that's all the testimony I have. Is there anyone that I have not spoken to? What's your name, ma'am? Glenn Eldon. Okay, Colleen, I didn't have you on my list, but I'm glad you're here. I'm sorry, what's your name? Okay, and I didn't have you on coming, so you're in. Borough. You can come on up. 2-1, you said?
Yeah.
And I'll let you state your name.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Fay. I'm the Joe for Darby Borough.
And sorry, we seem to have some interference.
Let me put it so you can see the names of the voters. Darby Borough 2-1.
Yes,
Jennifer. Yeah, but this is the name of the voter, Desiree Collins.
Desiree
So-
Collins.
Yeah, so you were missing a minority signature on her ballot.
Yes, I do remember the voter. Yes. So I went over to the touch writer to print the ballot, the provisional ballot for the voter. Followed all the procedures, had the voter fill out the information that applies to the voter. Print the ballot, retain the receipt, seal the envelope. I as well sealed the envelope with tape as well. The oversight with the minority inspector signature was completely on me. I knew that the minority inspector had to sign. Unfortunately, that day, I only worked with one staff member. No one in my staff showed up but one person. I appointed her as my minority inspector. She was originally my clerk. Later on, about 3 hours after opening, after communicating with the board about my staff issue, they did finally contact one person who was able to come. However, that poll worker was not stable for me throughout the day. He left several times and then ended up leaving early. So while we were closing, I intended to give it to the minority inspector to sign. Throughout the evening, everything that I and the minority inspector had to sign, I was going back and forth between my table and her table because we were trying to function as a complete staff, just the two of us, for most of the day. And it was an oversight on my part.
Well, thank you for coming forward. And that's a tough day, and to be understaffed, and then still make it through and do as well as you did in running that precinct. We really appreciate your service.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
no,
you.
it's a-
Absolutely. I had to come.
Mr. McLean or Mr. Alberts?
No question.
No, I think there's no questions. Appreciate your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
None, thank you.
Colleen? And you're with Glenn Eldon 3, right? Okay. And there was one provisional ballot that was lacking a minority signature. This is the name of the voter. Yep.
Hi, Colleen Dunn, Precinct 3, Glen Olden.
Are you the Joe or the?
I am the judge.
Sorry, you
And
don't- we should call you judge.
I am the judge. No, I very clearly remember my voter coming in and voting. I took care of him myself. I went through the touch screen and went through all the prompts to make sure we didn't mistakenly check off anything, gave him his ballot. went through the whole process where he filled it out and put it in the security envelope and handed it to me sealed. Then we put it in the envelope. My minority inspector was on his break. So I did say, make sure you sign everything that I put in that stack, but because it was in the big envelope for the end of the night, he missed it. So this falls on me. Please don't disenfranchise my voter. He did everything right. I didn't double check.
I wonder if we could put something on the envelope, if we don't already have something really big writing saying check for all your signatures before you seal. Like
There
on
is
this-
nothing on the envelope that says
Yeah, no,
check
I'm
for
just
all your
wondering if- I
signatures.
wonder if we could.
We
That would
definitely
probably
can.
help.
Additionally, this whole exercise, and thank you, Ms. Chauncey, for the outreach that you did, just goes a long way to show the public how challenging this job is and how seriously our poll workers take it and how dedicated everybody is to getting things right. You're coming here along with all the others who came here, really means a lot. And I think this has been one of the most rewarding provisional hearings I've ever witnessed. So thank you. And thank you, Ms. Chauncey, for organizing this.
I can assure you I'm never going to do this one again. So hopefully that's
Well,
just
and
what we get out of
and
it.
and lastly, I think I'll discuss this with the board members later, but I think given that we do have the emails for all of the judges, it might behoove us to do this kind of outreach as Ms. Winterbottom's staff reaches its conclusions. We can send out emails asking whether or not they remember this voter and whether they, because like you said, we changed the process this year. We did not just hand out a stack of provisional ballots. It was intentional. It was to make sure that all of the equipment is set up the way it was certified and to use that provisional feature on the touch writer. So I think we can add it stuff.
And I mean, before I get to these last few that I have, they've mentioned it several times. Not only does the poll worker have to put in the code, there is a list of instructions that goes page after page. I literally had to stand beside the machine and read each individual one to make sure I was checking the right buttons. Because I didn't want to just print a regular ballot. I had to print in a provisional ballot. So you got to push the button, the check box for that to make sure it does correctly. And then when that's all done, it prints out a receipt. And the receipt goes in with the regular ballots into the envelope that is then brought to the county. So it's an extra measure to ensure that these voters are actually casting their ballot and that the poll workers are actually involved in this process, because there's no other way to cast the ballot without them being involved. The next one that I have is Radnor 2-1, which was where the evacuation took place. I did receive an email from Miss Caroline Stewick. She is out of the country, but I did speak with her last night from, I guess, Budapest is where she is. And she did follow up with an email to me, which I can read into the record. Hi, Shelley. Thank you for reaching out in regards to an incorrectly submitted provisional ballot in Radnor 2-1. Obviously, this was a highly unusual election process this go around. Due to emergency evacuation, I did not have the opportunity to double check my voting materials at the end of the night as I would in normal circumstances. I can only imagine this is the reason for the missing signature. I firmly believe this was human error and definitely not voter error. And I am unable, she said she's unable to travel, unable to be here as she's out of the country, and apologize for the inconvenience. And Radnor 2-1, it was just this one ballot, because I believe there were multiple provisional ballots for after the evacuation that were counted as emergency ballots, from what I understand.
Had 47 that we used the provisional envelopes, but in reality, that was only because it was the most effective means of, without any kind of poll book, we had to evacuate and leave everything behind. We had the voters basically application for ballot in lieu of a poll book using the provisional envelope. So in reality, those 47 were emergency ballots and not provisional ballots. Those were legitimate voters who had no issue other than they were displaced from their polling place. So those were accepted in full, and weren't even considered provisional ballots, just so you know.
Well,
Yes.
it's not noted there, but this one, first of all, she did her service, I've said it was incredible. I mean, what she did, the calm she did it with to help those voters vote in that circumstance was you couldn't ask for a better Joe and their service. It's listed here as having, now, so I understand now. I did ask if there was any provisionals from that precinct so that we would, to know whether we were running into this issue, because the others are not considered provisional ballots, but it sounds like there's one, and that's fine. She didn't have a minority inspector come over with her.
Mhm.
So she was alone running that precinct in the last hours because of the evacuation. So there was an impossibility factor here as well. She may not have recognized that by email.
I could be wrong, but my impression is that this is a provisional ballot from
From
before
before.
the move
Mhm.
that had to be left behind with
Oh,
the
okay.
evacuation.
Thank you.
So
Okay.
I think there was a minority inspector in place at that time. But the point is that at the end of the night, as many of
They
our
wouldn't have been there
witnesses-
to check.
they weren't there to check, and they didn't even have access to the ballot to check it at that point. So sometimes when you would catch this mistake when you're
Right.
closing, that opportunity wasn't available to this.
And then many here have said that that's their normal process, is to catch it at the end before they seal that big envelope.
That's
Okay.
correct. And she did, Mr. Parks is correct. This was a ballot from prior to the evacuation. And I'm passing up her email for the record.
Thank you.
C5.
The next one is from Thornberry 3. Sean Taylor is the judge. He just responded very simply to me with minority inspector sends voter back to the Joe's table. The Joe has voter fill out the necessary paperwork. Joe signs the envelope. Joe walks envelope to minority inspector for signature. Vote gets put in the appropriate bag. In particular, it's probably missing a signature because it's a busy day and we're tired and it's a relatively easy thing to overlook. This is Thornberry 3. And I'll pass it up as C6.
Okay, and that one has the minority signature, just not the Joe's.
Hang on one second.
It's listed as Joe's signature being the gap.
Yes, it was missing the Joe signature. It
It
had
has
the
a
minority
signature, it's
signature.
just not
That's
Joe's.
correct. The next one that I have, or the next two that I have are both from Yaden. Yaden 5 is Alan Hughes. There was actually, some correspondence between us. He initially responded with, I am unable to attend tomorrow, but our process was simple. Provisional voter identified. I took voter to touch writer and imitated the provisional vote process. Voter cast vote and printed ballot. I gave them a green envelope to insert and seal their ballot, had voter fill out white envelope, sign ticket, and place the ballot in the envelope. I affixed the label and signed, asked the minority to sign. And then I responded, other than human error, can you think of a reason why the ballot correctly, this is a typo, may have been missing a Joe or minority inspector signature. And he replied, other than human error, there would be no other reason why. And I will pass this up in C7.
Thank you.
And then finally, I have Yaden 9, which is Cynthia Brock, who responded that unfortunately she's unable to come to the hearing. I am totally surprised that I or the minority inspector missed a step while processing a provisional ballot. After the voter sealed the green envelope, inserted it into the white envelope, and completed the applicable sections on the white envelope, I inspected the envelope to ensure it was signed by the voter. Then I signed the envelope, handed it to the minority inspector, affixed the barcode, and handed the receipt to the voter. In particular, Yaden 9 was missing the minority signature. And following her procedure here, it sounds like when she handed it to the minority signature, it just didn't get signed. And so I'm passing this up as C7.
C8.
Oh, C8, sorry. And that's all the witnesses and or exhibits that I have. I did just want to point out a couple of things. In particular, there is a case from 2020, I'm sure you guys are familiar with, out of Allegheny County, where it's about statutory construction of the election code. And it's this particular case, the Commonwealth Court said the provisional ballot votes shall not be counted. However, when it's missing a signature, however, this case was specific to the voter signature. It did not contemplate the possibility that we could be missing a poll worker signature. In particular, the language that they quoted from the statute, the individual shall place the secrecy envelope in the provisional ballot envelope and quote, shall place his signature on the front of the provisional ballot. There was no contemplation in this case regarding missing judge or minority inspector signature. And which brings us to the most recent case that we had here in Delaware County from September with regards to provisional ballots and the voters' attempt to cure mail-in ballots. And as I stated earlier, 37 of these ballots were a voter's attempt to cure a mail-in ballot after notification that they had received. This case was specific to whether or not voters are allowed to cure in the precinct as when they have defective mail-in ballots. But some of the language that is used, I think, is very important. In paragraph 5 of the case, the court states, if the signatures, and it's quoting statute 25 PS 3050, which is what Mr. Parks asserted, if the signatures are determined to be genuine, shall count the ballot if the County Board of Elections confirms that the individual did not cast any other ballot, including an absentee ballot. It goes further to say, to quote a case from 2020, the canvass of absentee and mail-in ballots from the November 3rd, 2020 general election. It is longstanding and overriding policy in this Commonwealth to protect elective franchise. The elective code must be liberally construed so as not to deprive the voters of their right to elect a candidate of their choice. It is therefore a well-settled principle of Pennsylvania election law that every rationalization within the realm of common sense should aim at saving the ballot rather than voiding it. And I think that is perfectly clear what needs to happen here within the realm of common sense. We've contacted every judge of elections that participated in the provisional ballot process as it relates to these 47 provisional ballots. None of them, zero, responded that someone was making a protest or that they had suspicions that someone submitted it improperly. It was overwhelming, as you've seen here from today, that the issue was errors with the poll workers. There's a lot of steps that have to be followed. The signatures for the judge and minority inspector are at the very bottom of the envelope on the far left corner. And if you're examining, because we've all been trained, it's been ingrained in us, you have 2 voter signatures, period, the end. That's what's been ingrained in us from every training session. Every test has that on there. It's not been ingrained in us to double check the bottom, way bottom of this envelope to ensure that one of us signed the envelope. There's a lot going on that day. I also wanted to point out that the Department of State issued guidance after the September decision in Delaware County. And I thought it was relevant when we come to a footnote that they included in their guidance. This is from October 12th, 2023. I don't know if you guys have a copy, but I can pass it up.
The board was provided with a copy of that guidance back at the time it was issued. It was circulated around by Mr. Allen and myself. So the board may not have it with them right this moment, but they are familiar with it and have seen it recently.
So you have a relevant footnote we're going to read?
Yes, so the footnote is with regards to, I'm looking for it's quoted up here. I'm trying to find the number 2, forgive me. If a voter's mail-in or absentee ballot was rejected for a reason unrelated to the voter's qualifications and the voter submits a provisional ballot and meets other provisional ballot requirements, the provisional ballot shall be counted if the county determines that the voter is eligible to vote. And the footnote states that the department agrees with the analysis of Delaware County Court of Common Pleas from the September case. And I argue here that the voters qualified. Ms. Winterbottom stated that as such. They've determined there's no other justification or reason why these ballots should not be counted. I know it appears that there's weight that's being placed on the judges that are appearing and stating they specifically remember the voter. I would argue this applies to every single one of these precincts and every single one of these ballots, regardless of whether the judge of elections was here to testify or not. Absent these challenge procedures are developed and in place to prevent fraud, to prevent the abilities of, therefore, legitimate challenges to a voter's ability to be able to cast a ballot. They are not here to disenfranchise a voter because of a procedural mistake. That was not contemplated when these procedures were established. I admit and I concede that these procedures should remain in place. You should be able to challenge provisional ballots, and the board should be able to make the decision to not count provisional ballots where there are serious questions as to whether or not the voter was qualified, or whether the minority or somebody on the board is specifically stating that a voter should not be allowed to cast a vote. I agree that should remain in place. But when there's just a procedural error where someone forgot to sign, that's a bogus way of not allowing a voter to get their vote counted, particularly when 37 out of the 47, this is their second attempt to do so. And I believe I will allow Ms. Winterbottom to speak on that, but it's my understanding that this is the first cycle that the board has chosen not to count when there's been at least one of the signatures. As long as there was one signature in the past, these votes have counted. So I would defer to Ms. Winterbottom and the board as to whether or not that's procedurally accurate, but I would argue this is particularly a case where these votes, all 37, should be counted. Thank you for your time.
I just want to address a couple of things to the board. First, and I think it's important for context here, in the 1980 Pennsylvania Supreme Court case called In Re Contest of 1979 General Election for Office of District Attorney of Washington County, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that under the election code and pertinent case law, a policy is reflected of protecting of the franchise where the voter's intent can be determined and where any minor non-compliance with statutory requirements is not the fault of the voter. And it is true that historically, the board has adopted the policy that if there had been a signature of one or the other of an election official on a provisional ballot, that ballot would be counted. Now, in the intervening period, and this is relatively recent within the last year, a decision came down from the appellate courts of Pennsylvania saying that on an other open question that up until that decision about whether the two signatures were required from the voter or not. And up until this decision, this county followed the rule that as long as there was a signature in the voter affidavit box, then you would count that ballot. That decision from the Commonwealth Court was that you had to have a signature from the voter in each of the two boxes on the outside of the provisional ballot envelope, which is why, of course, we stress that so much in training, because that's a new development and our hands are tied on that now that we have an appellate court ruling on that point. It is correct that the directive given to Crystal and her team was to put these in the recommended no count. I want to just make sure the record is clear. No decision was made not to count these. A certain directive is given to Crystal and her team in voter registration to make a recommendation as to how to count these. That recommendation needs to be accepted or rejected ultimately by the board. So it's a preliminary determination. The idea is that because there is some question as to whether the rationale of the two voter signature case applies to poll worker signatures and whether they both need to be included or not, that seemed to be a matter would be appropriate to do a recommended no count. If there were challenges to that, we would entertain those challenges. And ultimately, this board would make that determination based on its own good judgment. If I were on the board, I would accept ballots that had the signature of one election official, at least one election official, and no indication of any fraud associated with that ballot. Because I think that that's the balance between honoring the system that's in the code, in the language of the code, and also not disenfranchising a voter. And we have, as I've just read to you, we have case law saying that if there's a mistake and it's not the fault of the voter, then you don't disenfranchise the voter. You could even arguably take that case law and reach the conclusion that absent evidence of fraud, a ballot that was otherwise appropriate but lacked any election official signature should be counted. And indeed, we've heard some testimony here today from some of our best poll workers in the county. In their own precincts, we ended up with ballots with no signature from either official. And we have, undisputed evidence in terms of how the process works to know that people can't just like rummage around, get a ballot off the shelf, fill it in, and then it's somehow a sneaky way without the blessing of the election officials involved at the poll to get a vote counted that otherwise shouldn't be counted. So I do think that, again, it's a judgment call for the people on this board. This is where you use your good judgment and your oath to make this determination. But certainly it is well within the scope of the legal authority, both in the code and the case law, to count every ballot on this list, if you would determine, and certainly to count any ballot that has at least one election official signature on it.
Well, I want to start with that one. The one that has, I can tell you, I tend to vote in favor of counting those with one election official's signature on it, period. I think that was the right way to go before, and I think it's the right way now. And I don't know that development in the case law related to the voters is persuasive. It's certainly not persuasive to me. But I just want to push on that a little bit to make sure that some of my thoughts, just whether they're right or wrong, I don't know it's going to change those thoughts, but I do want to make sure I understand it correctly. You read 25 PS 3050 earlier today. Obviously, it does mention specifically, it uses both the judge of elections and the minority inspector by name in the statute. But then it goes on to focus on which ballots will not be accepted, and it goes on to focus only on voter related error and both
Yes.
okay, that's correct. And then both of the errors that have recently been decided more definitively, the ones where we say our hands are tied, we have no discretion, are the two voter signatures. And that decision was based, I believe, on the part there that talks about the voter signature.
Yeah, and the language in the code is notably distinct there. It's very specific that the voter must sign. The code does not say the election officials must sign, nor does it say that if they don't sign, you can't count the ballot. The code does say if the voter doesn't sign, you can't count the ballot. So there's meaningful difference in the code language between signatures of the voter versus signatures of the election official.
And that's why I don't know that case being definitively decided as to the voter signature is it's not persuasive to me.
It's not persuasive to me either, but this is a matter for
No,
the board to
I'm
determine,
working
not
through it.
for me as the
And-
solicitor.
And the secrecy envelope, similarly, we got definitive decision about that, and that's also delineated, right, specifically.
Yes, and that's both determined to be a voter error according to the courts and also to have a material consequence because there's no privacy to that ballot then. So there are two rationales for that.
So that being said, and we have specific statements by judges or minority inspectors related to certain precincts that have neither the Joe nor the minority signature. And as to all of those, in the presence of those statements, to explain the discrepancy, I think combined with all the voter verifications that Crystal's already established for all of these voters, I myself am persuaded that those should be counted as well, because I mean, as you said, one of our best election officials was actually literally wrote the book, has done work in service to us and separately to this country, or additionally to this country, because I think our service here is to the country, has made the mistake of having both signatures missing. That's pretty darn powerful. You couldn't have a better witness with more respect, but from this board member than Ziggy, and it can happen. So my issue where I'm struggling and truly am open and maybe even I know maybe even decided, but I wanted to hear from it, is I believe that there are 4 voter provisional ballots that we had neither a Joe or minority signature, as to which there were no emails or statements made by anybody relevant. And
I have the same count for.
you have the same count. And so those are tough. And I think Mr. Parks and Mr. Chauncey, you make good arguments as to some of the safeguards. First, we have Crystal saying that they're valid voters. They didn't vote somewhere else. They didn't mail in vote. They didn't absentee vote. We don't have any reason to, they're not eligible voters. I mean, the whole thing. She's done all her checks on those 4. And just for the record, it's Chester City 2-3, Ridley Park 4, Ridley Township 3-1, and Tinicum 4. Are those the same you have, Mr. Parks?
Yes, same as what I have.
Okay. There's 1 vote at issue, 1 provisional ballot at issue in each of those. So we don't have any irregular reason to believe that this voter voted twice. So we don't have any sort of, we have no indication of fraud in terms of the voter voting twice. We do have this additional procedure, which we can, I don't know, moan and groan about the length of time it takes to go through the 13 pages or whatever the number of pages is, but it does, a poll worker, I assume that Joe was given, I'm going to ask a question while I was talking. I assume that Joe is the one given the code to the touch writer for the purpose of provisional ballots?
Yes,
Okay, and the Joe is a sworn, has a sworn duty to carry out the election fully and consistently with the laws. Mr. Parks and I read through the oath last night, but that's correct.
Yes, that's correct for every election worker who would be part of a poll working team at a precinct has to swear an oath at the beginning of the evening or at the beginning of the day. And the code actually specifies a unique oath for each one of those positions: clerk, machine operator, inspector, and judge.
It's pretty strong language, as I remember. Some of it's, you need to do everything to make sure that this happens correct.
Yes.
these are materials that are returned to us in a blue bag, typically by the judge.
You're
or-
jumping ahead, Mr. Allen, to where
Oh,
I'm going.
sorry.
Don't play chess with me and get ahead of me. Okay. Okay, and then they have to go through, or they assign somebody from their team, presumably under their oath and duty to print the provisional ballot and to provide the provisional materials, as Mr. Parks notes, that's also in the custody of the Joe, to the voter. So they do all of that, and then it comes back, and we've heard testimony from what I think was super valuable about the testimony, whether they were missing both signatures or one, although I really valued the ones where there were both, because I don't have this dilemma with those particular ballots, is what we heard is it gets a little bit busy. So my question for before we get to the blue bags, Mr. Allen, is this white envelope, the white envelope that we've heard much about today. What is it that we don't have a Joe or minority signature on the provisional, but we have reason, certainly all these steps lead to the fact that they would have been engaged. One of them would have been engaged in carrying out this. We have the voter who's duly authorized to vote and eligible, and no indication that they voted somewhere else or by fraud. They've voted twice. Tell me about this envelope, the closing procedures that you were about to go to, because that is significant to me. If the Joe is truly closing out the procedures and saying, these are the provisional ballots of my precinct. And we heard a lot of people, there was checks on counting them and other things, that if they missed the signature block and they didn't look in it as Ziggy didn't, I may be inclined to count those, but those are the ones that are giving me the most trouble. So I'd love to hear, Mr. Allen, from you. I'll stop talking so you can speak.
No, it's at that point, it's fairly straightforward. They have to round up the envelopes, make sure they place them in the larger white envelopes so that it's easier for Crystal's team when they're going through the materials, which may be returned properly or improperly. Sometimes they return a box of paperwork that should be in the green bag, or sometimes some of the stuff that belongs in some of the items that are supposed to be returned in the green bag come back in the blue bag, and vice versa. That white envelope is intended to make our work a little easier in terms of being able to recognize and locate these provisional envelopes.
Is there any signatures on the white envelope? Is there any, what happens to the white?
Pam?
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to essentially provide my own testimony as a judge to say, yes, there is. So when you receive the provisional ballot back from the voter and they've completed everything and they've left, as a judge, and I think someone else spoke on it earlier, it's kind of uncomfortable having a couple of ballots and sealed envelopes just sitting on the table out in the open that's not in a bag somewhere. So you take it upon yourself to be very thorough in making sure you know where those ballots are the entire time you were there. So I can't speak for all of the judges, but at least for me, when that ballot happens, I put it inside the larger white envelope so that they're all together. I know where they are, and that envelope stays in the blue bag so that when I have to go and put another ballot in there, I know exactly where it is and I know the ballots that are in there. At the end of the night, I have to go in and I have to count the provisional ballots that are in the envelope. So if there's one extra, I'm going to know about it. I'm going to know which one of these. There's a corresponding receipt from the touchpad that goes with each ballot. So it coincides with everything. And then you have to count the ballots, and then you have to sign, and the minority inspector has to sign on the outside of the envelope that they're all in there and that they've been sealed. So even if there's no votes, the vote signatures are not on the ballot for each individual one, it's on the outside ballot that they're all contained in.
That's
I would
consistent
add,
with-
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I would add that in completing the return sheet, there's also a mathematical procedure that the poll workers need to complete where they have to list how many ballots were printed on the touch writer, less how many of those were provisional ballots.
And one additional step is you're printing the tapes from the touch writer that the minority inspector and the judge have to sign those tapes acknowledging these are the number of ballots that were printed off of this machine. And this year it had, the regular ballots, and it has the number of provisional ballots on the tape. So the signatures are in multiple places aside just from the individual envelope.
And Pam, would that have been consistent with what, I have a specific awareness of this recently. I haven't been to Joe in a while, but when I was at Radnor, there was a question about how to fill out that white envelope, but I just couldn't remember what the signatures were at the bottom of it, because one of the Joes, the Joe whose precinct we invaded, had a question about the question was whether how many provisional ballots had been received. There's a question, by the way, that's how many provisional ballots have been received from the Board of Elections. And the confusion was that was 0 because we didn't actually provide them. They had to be printed out intentionally on the touch writer. So, but it is consistent that at the bottom of that, they do sign off on that, as well as all the additional places where they sign and return the material. Thank you. Well, under all those circumstances, I want to have the board discussion, but that certainly all may lead to a persuasive argument to me. But anyway, Mr. McLean.
Okay.
I know, I'm throwing it out there so that you could refute, you could argue, you could discuss. I really want to get to the right answer.
I think that the election code specifically provides that the envelope be signed by the judge of elections and the minority inspector. I think at some point, in the discussion that just took place back and forth, somebody said that wasn't the case. The statute specifically says it must be signed by the judge of elections and the minority inspector.
Right.
Like that's like the signature return is almost like a reproduction of the form.
Are you gonna
No,
argue with me
no,
during
no.
my comments? I mean, it
I want
says,
you to have the code.
that's exactly, I have the code in front of me. And it says signed by the judge of elections and the minority inspector. And it is clear when you look at that, to me, that the reason for that, it's the judge of election and the minority inspector, not the majority inspector, not a clerk. It's the judge of election, and the minority inspector, which are supposed to be people of differing parties. And that provides a check and a balance. Let's start with the proposition that the provisional balloting process is an exception. Something has gone wrong that causes the voter to do it. Not necessarily the voter's fault. It may be that we didn't include them in the book or whatever the case might be, but there has been some problem that has developed to allow for the voter or require that the voter vote provisionally. So as a way to ensure that there is a check and a balance, that this individual who is not apparently registered at that polling place, at least in the official registration book, is able to vote. You have 2 election officials sign that that person, is the one that is casting the vote. I go on to, again, as I look at the election code, it does not provide that there be a per se rejection of those ballots if it is missing both of those signatures. So I believe that that defect can be cured since the code doesn't say that we have to reject it. And we did that here today. You had testimony that was presented. I'll accept I'm fine accepting the email testimony, if you call it that, of the judges of elections or the others that required that stating that, yes, they were authentic. As I said in my comments before, I think that's the authentication to me is the key issue. So in those situations where it can be authenticated that the judge and the minority inspector were aware of it, that was the person, but it just, we didn't get, because of a mistake, didn't get the signature. I would vote to approve those as they have been presented here today. For the ones where we don't have any authentication, I don't think that we can just simply cure it and overlook what the election code requires. I've said it before, and I may be in the minority in it, but there are rules that are in place in the code. And I understand all the court decisions that say we interpret the rules liberally to construe what the voter did. But here, again, in this section, there is a check and a balance that the legislature obviously put in the provisional ballot, because it is an exception to our regular process. And I do think that, we just can't ignore that and just give it no meaning, whatsoever. I think public perception is that when we change the rules on the fly, it leads to less confidence in our voting system. And here, I think there should be at least some, if the rule was not followed, if the judge and the minority inspector did not sign it, I think the voter and the judge or the minority inspector can have every opportunity to try to cure that and authenticate it to us. But absent that, I don't believe that those votes, ought to be counted. So I would, when the time comes, I would, move to approve the various voters to be counted from everybody we heard from, either in person or by email, except for I think in Haverford 7-2, the email just simply said the minority inspector didn't sign it. And that doesn't really give me a reason why or much of authentication. But otherwise, I'm willing to set a very low bar, to authenticate it. But I think there should be some evidence, of that authentication. I realize that, Mr. Parks had quoted a case, I think from 1980, that was prior to provisional balloting, prior to the legislature actually, setting forth those rules. So I do think that section is an important check and balance. And I'm willing to set a very low bar for for it to be overcome in the case of a mistake. But that's what I think my interpretation of it is.
So Mr. McLean, just so we make sure that when we get to the votes, we handle this in an orderly way. The votes that you we heard testimony on today. So sorry, let me make sure I'm clear. If there weren't both signatures, you're inclined not to vote for it, unless they're absent some statements. Right, so like the Upper Darby 373873, they're missing a minority signature. Those are ones that you're not inclined to vote in favor of.
Correct. And well,
Okay.
I'm
So
inclined
let's
to
go
vote
through
in
it.
favor of the ones where we
Right.
received evidence, providing some
Sure.
some modicum that it was authentic. And
Right, no, I
think
mean, historically.
I have that as 1-7,
1-7.
Concord 5, Concord 9, Concord 10,
Mhm,
Darby Borough 2-1,
mhm,
Edgemont
mhm.
1, Glen Olden 3. Like I said, the email that we got for Haverford 7-2 didn't really say anything, so I wouldn't do that. Lansdowne 5, Media West,
Mhm,
Middletown 2-2,
mhm.
Middletown 3-3. The Nether Providence 2-2 and 4-1. Radnor 2-1, Thornbury 3, and Yaden 5 and 9.
Thank you. Mr. Alberts? Or sorry, have you,
That's all I have.
Mr. Alberts?
Yeah, I mean, I do appreciate where Member McBlain is coming from. I'm encouraged by the fact that we are debating over so few that are lacking. I think we have 4 ballots that are really in question here, where there's just no verification, where we didn't get any testimony. It's missing the signatures that are required. And I'm additionally comforted by the fact that, having watched the arduous process of skipping 14 questions to even get to the point where you can print a provisional ballot with the assistance of the precinct board of elections, as well as the additional process of, they included these ballots in the white envelope that they submitted with their official election materials. I'm also very sympathetic to the argument that we could, in the absence of any evidence of fraud or misdeed here, I do err on the side of enfranchising voters, and I'd be open to accepting all of these ballots that are in question. So I'm curious to hear what the chair thinks, and I think I've been given obviously a very clear picture of what happens in these polls on election day, and I don't think it's reasonable to assume that anyone is trying to commit fraud here when we're left with 4 ballots that are even in question that made it to us. Certainly, that's not going to influence the outcome of any contest. So it seems reasonable to me. The most likely scenario here is that there was human error, and there's no doubt as to the identity or the eligibility of these voters, according to the testimony from Ms. Winterbottom. So I'm prepared to accept them all.
I have to say, when I came in here today, I was really uncertain that I would vote in favor of accepting those 4. But hearing the testimony really triggered to me all the different steps in which the judge and minority inspector still participate in processing of those ballots, even after they would have been expected to sign. I do hope, Mr. Allen, I think we've discussed this, and I'm sure, Pam, that this is a process that we will do, but every one of the judges who didn't come here today, or particularly those that had nobody sign, needs to be followed up on to make sure that they're trained. But here it's on the judges, it's on the board of elections, the local board of elections side, not on the voter side. So I have a question, Mr. Parks. I think when we take the vote, should we split those 4 out in case there's any specific challenge, or should we do them all, divide them? It sounds like we're going to end up having a split vote. I certainly want to make sure that Mr. McBlain's are separated out, the ones he's inclined to vote for.
Yeah, so what I would recommend is probably that it sounds like there's a motion that Mr. McBlain would support as to the ballots that he read off. And by the way, those are consistent with with my own
And mine as well.
track keeping. So perhaps have that motion. Sounds like there will be, based on the comments I've heard here, that motion would pass. Then there would presumably be a motion as to the, whatever other universe of ballots that other people on this board feel should be counted. There can be a motion on those additional ballots, whether that's everything else or everything less 4 or whatever it might be. I don't see a need to carve out the 4 from that second motion if the motion is going to be inclusive of everything else on the list.
Okay, but if somebody wanted to challenge the 4 based on the arguments Mr. McBlain made, which is not where Mr. Albert's right, it sounds like they're coming out, then it won't make a difference to that challenge if they're voted collectively.
I don't believe so. And for the record, you've identified it's Chester City 2-3, it's Ridley Park 4, Ridley Township 3-1, and Tinicum 4. So those can be identified based on the materials that were part of this proceeding, the summary documents that we have, and the record. There's no mystery as to what 4 are in that category.
So perhaps, Madam Chair, in order to sort of just get it on,
Do it. Let's do it.
I would move to approve the provisional ballots of Samantha Robbins, Sylvia Yost, Teresa Rawa, Helen Struckman, Desiree Collins, Carl Becht, Craig Thole, Tara McGettigan, Joseph Lysius, Glenn Weiss, Margot Sika, Joanne Simony, Susan Garrison, Theodore Larkamp, Sophia Phillips, Thomas Reeves, Anthony Voci, Catherine McDermott, Sarah Kaufhold, Ann McFadden, Julie Sturman, Veronica Staley, Norman Baker, Barbara Hughes, Bonnie Tyler, and Oretha Jertay.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All
Quick
those-
question, does that include the Radnor voter?
Yes, that was included.
Thank you.
I thought you said it, yeah. Okay, any further discussion? Then all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
None opposed, that motion passes. Okay. The second vote would be to approve, to accept the provisional ballots of Sienna Kirkpatrick, Warren Carney, Donna Carney, MD Islam. I apologize for anybody whose name I said it wrong. Dawola Koita, Ruben Hull, Darlene Abdullah, Imoni Satchel, Jasmine Brown, Dominic DeFiore, Vanita Bailey, Curtis Pierre, Musa Toure, Amy Miller, Mary Ellen McGonigal, I'm sorry, McMonigal, Bonnie Fromal, Eric Cole, Paul Stowe, Brian Collins, Vincent Geoffrey, Deborah Hippa. Did I miss any? Okay. Any
No,
further
that
dis-
looks like a complete list of everybody that wasn't prior motion.
If no further discussion, then all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Oh, sorry, did we second the motion? I missed that. I don't want.
I will second the motion.
Yes, you need a second.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, then all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Okay, that motion passes 2-1. Thank you, Ms. Chauncey. Thank you, Ms. Winterbaum. Thank you, everybody who helped with that, those difficult questions. All right, Mr. Allen, authorization to sign and report on official election results to the Department of State.
At close of business, 5 p.m., 7 days after Election Day, each jurisdiction, each county in the Commonwealth is required to file with the Department of State the unofficial election results. I'm asking for the board's authorization to sign and report those on your behalf today.
Any need for discussion? This is our normal process. All those in favor say, or sorry, do we have a motion to accept?
So moved.
Approve Mr. Allen's request.
Thank you. Any second? I'll second it.
Second.
I heard
Awesome.
Mr. Albert said had also moved at contemporaneous lane, so I'll deem that a second.
I'll second the motion.
However, we want to do it. All right, so we'll say Mr. Alberts moved, Mr. McLean seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
And thank you.
Aye.
And none opposed, that motion passes.
Thank you for both of those motions. So next, we have 3 campaign finance requests. What this is.
Madam Chairman, Wayne Thomas Lord, I'm here to watch a complaint from objection to a certain procedure done in the 6 months township, which is what we did. I thought we would get to that before proceeding with the other areas.
Normally, the time for that would have been during the public comment.
Well, actually, did you
Did you have an
Did you-
objection
did
before the
you-
vote?
did you attend the provisional ballot process at all with Ms. Winterbottom that was open to campaigns to come and view?
I didn't attend anything. I'm here only together. The Edgemont Township Republican Party is for watching the objection.
And the gentleman used the microphone at the podium.
What?
At the time for doing that would have been during the provisional ballot discussion that you obviously considered the time.
I was not aware that you had an objection. We had the public comment, and then I acknowledged that Ms. Chauncey was the only objector that I was aware of. So
Yeah, the way the process works is that it's open, we advertise a legal notice that, you know, with the location, the time and the start time, the review of the provisional ballots, starting as early as the Wednesday after election day. At that time, just like in the polling place, watchers representing, any candidate or political party, not really watchers, but authorized representatives, may have come and observe. And during that process may review all of the items and the recommendations that Ms. Winterbottom and her staff are making to the board and then lodge an objection. So
Talking about on your agenda today, you have a section dealing with provisional ballots and objections.
why don't we
Yeah,
hear?
I think what Mr. Allen's trying to say is the objections need to be lodged at the provisional ballot, at the process where the provisional ballot recommendations are being made public. That was last week. You don't come to this hearing today and just make objections. You make your objections at that step in the process.
On your agenda, and that's objections.
Yes, the ones that were
Hearings,
already lodged in.
considerations of the.
Yeah, you
the
don't get to
objections.
come here and just make objections. You
But
have
that-
to make the objections when the provisional ballot recommendations are publicly circulated. Now, having said that, just separately,
I'm about to ask, I think we should hear, look, you're out of process, so I don't know that we're going to be able to have anything to resolve, but I do think we should take a public hearing on your,
Well-
at least as to what he had to say.
before we do that, calling upon the procedures that are sometimes used in court, I would be interested in a proffer as to what you're going to say, and then, we can make a determination as to whether to go back on the record. or
Right, well,
not.
that's what I'm asking for. So if you would introduce yourself,
Well, we're in a public meeting that's being broadcast.
all on the
and
record.
Recorded, but we're not putting it on. I know, because that was the provisional ballot hearing on objections that were lodged before today. And we'll make a determination based on your proffer about whether we go on the record for that.
I've timed my presentation, it's slightly more than 2 minutes.
Okay.
no, that's fine.
Go for it.
I want to hear what you would have liked to say. I do think it may be out of process, but let's hear it.
Well, the objection I wish to lodge deals with the counting of the provisional votes and also accepting the recommendations concerning the acceptance of provisional votes from the voter registration office. The basis of the objection is that the Edgemont Republican Party and the Edgemont Republican candidates appearing on the ballot were not advised and were not aware when the election bureau would the Bureau of Elections would be reviewing the provisional ballots from Edgemont Township, which I understand was done on November the 10th, 2023, last Friday, here at the courthouse, when the courthouse was closed. And I'm seeking to also ask that the Republican representatives be given an opportunity to review with sufficient time the ballots to determine if there's any objection to those ballots. So it's the basis is fundamentally is that the Democrats were represented during that examination of the provisionals in Edgemont Township. The Republicans did not get any notice, information, or warning, or any type of advanced information that this would be done last Friday. And therefore, obviously, no Republican was present during the examination of the provisional ballots when that was done here.
Okay, so I'm looking at our website, and right on our website is the notice posted for the provisional ballot review.
We did not give special notices. It seems to be, maybe I'm reading too much into it, I'm inferring too much, but were you implying that we gave notice to the Democratic Party that we did not give to the Republican
That's
Party?
exactly what I'm saying.
Well, that's
I'm
patently
just,
false.
that's the information I have.
Additionally, when you suggest that the
That's
courthouse
right.
was closed.
That's the
Please.
thrust, or that's,
Okay,
that's what we're
I
talking
also-
about.
I should have, just before Mr. Parks spoke, let's talk about the notice we did give. What did we give in terms of notice and to whom of
We-
the provisional process review?
We publish legal notice as well as posted on our website. With all processes that happen after election day, whether or not the courthouse is open during these processes, if we run into Friday, which was Veterans Day, even though the courthouse was closed, the government center was open and people were able to come into the office, into the voter registration office, which is right across from the security desk. So anybody coming into the security desk is allowed to go to voter registration during those hours.
It's academic if you don't know it, though. If you don't know that there's this.
Oh, if you don't
meeting
look,
Or
yeah.
this examination of the ballots going on. And that's what I'm proposing here.
With all
that
due
we weren't
respect, sir,
advised.
the political parties, whether they be municipal or countywide, have an obligation to their members to know this stuff. This is what they're in business to be involved in. And you can't blame the county because you didn't get a handwritten personal invitation to attend something that's publicly posted on our website, which is something that didn't happen before 2020, incidentally, and that is publicly noticed according to the laws. We go above and beyond the laws by not only publishing it in newspapers of circulation, as is the legal requirement, but we put it on our website. And I can assure you that the Republican Party of Delaware County is well aware of these proceedings and has had representatives participating in them in each of the last 3 years, as far as I know, certainly in 2020 and 2022. I'm not testifying. I'm telling you in this public meeting. No, we're not even on the record.
That I'm trying to.
Yeah, this is our meeting, though.
Record for.
Wait, sorry, sir. Mr. Parks is telling you, as Mr. Allen did, we published it on our website and we published it as legally required in the notices. Those were complied with completely. There's no partisanship to that at all. There was no, I heard Mr. Allen say earlier that it was patently false, that there was partisanship to the notices.
Apologize. Yeah, you said it's on the website, and where else is it?
It published in a newspaper of general circulation as required by, we can get you the details of that, but our clerk of the bureau handles the publications, if I'm not mistaken. Jim knows more about the details.
The reality is if you I want people to participate in reviewing the provisional ballots. That's part of the process that makes sure our elections are fair and fully carried out. I'm sorry that you did not personally feel like you got the notice, but it was properly published and distributed to everybody in the general public, no less the parties could have accessed
Via the website and via the
newspapers of general circulation. We can get you the details.
Circulations. Is
Right.
that,
Yes.
is that what
and-
I can take back to my client?
Yes, and also, I mean, this is, I can't speak for the head of the Republican Party of Delaware County, but as Mr. Park said, they're well engaged in this process and aware of it. So, I'm sorry that the Edgemont Party was unaware, but that's, there was no reason for us to believe that there was a general lack of awareness that we would have a provisional review, and both parties have known about this and participated in it from various localities, candidates, the general parties, right, for years. I mean, I've
Yeah.
seen them do it, so.
I just want to offer one other explanation. This isn't a procedural gotcha, and I'll explain why. Under the code, when the provisional ballot recommendations are made available to the public for consideration, if there is a ballot that the recommendation is to count and somebody wants to lodge an objection to that ballot, the code says that we have to notify the voter and give the voter a chance to be at this hearing. So if you show up and make your challenge to counting that voter's ballot for the first time at this hearing, you can't give the voter the statutory notice that's required. That's why it's a two-step process. You have the publication of the recommendations, any objections are taken. We can then notify voters to whose ballots were recommended to be counted, that to which there's an objection. And those voters then have the opportunity to come in here and participate in this hearing. But if you come in here and make your objection for the first time in this hearing, those voters don't know and they don't have even a chance to show up and defend
I'm not asking the board
themselves.
to do anything today other than to accept the representations that I just made a few moments ago. Then it'd be up to the board to decide if further action would be needed. But it's my understanding that I need to put these objections of record prior to obviously the board being able to act and us proceeding any further anyway. So that's why I'm here. I'm not asking you to do anything today other than and make a decision if I can make this presentation that essentially I already made, but it has not been a formally of record.
Well, we don't normally have a court report, just so you know here. That's a special because of the nature of the objections. This is all recorded. So certainly you will have a recording of this available to you at some point after this hearing or this meeting. So
I don't think I introduced myself earlier.
Okay, please.
My name's Thomas Laurie, Lawrie. I'm an attorney and I represent the Edgemont Township Republican Party.
And what I think the totality of all of this is that the process where Ms. Winterbottom makes sure that all the provisional ballots are available for review. She attaches the signature. We've had, the page with the screenshot of the signature. We've had people challenge based on that. It's all laid out and available for review. And that's where I assume Ms. Chauncey made her objections. And others may have observed those provisional ballots and chosen not to make objections. That has already passed. So what I hear you saying is in order to lodge your objection, frankly, we'd have to go back, reopen that process, notify the voters, and then redo this hearing, right? And that's not something that is in proper process and would put us out of compliance.
In all due respect, I'm not asking, I don't think the request here is to ask the board to do that, but allow the representatives from the Edgemont Republican Party to make an examination of the 20 or so provisional ballots that were examined on the last Friday, but obviously we weren't there. And that it can be determined, we would then be in position to say, well, we object to certain things or we don't object to certain things. But until we actually see the ballots, we can't take that position.
Well, you're saying you don't want a do-over, but you just asked for an exact do-over.
No, I didn't ask for a do-over. I asked for an opportunity.
It sounds
to
He's going to
review the
give you some
ballots,
advice
that's all.
on how to observe.
Mr. Laurie, so it sounds like you're not raising specific objections to any provisional ballots today. But what your objection is that whatever notice that was either published or provided by this board was insufficient to allow you to recognize or realize that provisional ballots would be counted on a legal holiday.
Correct.
At the courthouse.
That's why I'm here, not to ask the board to then pull out the ballots today but to give the Republican Party of Edgemont Township an opportunity to see those ballots. That's all. Okay.
Well, I mean, I think that there's normal processes for reviewing of public records that could be requested from the Board of Elections.
We'll certainly make all of the information available. However, we are under a deadline to process the ballots.
I think that's the nature of
Yeah.
my objection, of the party's objection, is that because of this deadline and then accepting the recommendations that have been, I think they were made today, that would impede the relevance of proceeding after the ballots were accepted. So.
No, I mean, I think that you've missed the window for those objections unless you wanted to see court relief. But to the extent that you still want to review them, there are ways to request public record reviews of the board. But what I think Mr. Allen's saying is timing wise, that timing may not work out for you in terms of being able to accomplish that. And I don't know what you would do if you did, because we're not going to, I'm not intending to reopen this. We followed the process consistent with the law. So absent a court telling me that we needed to, I think that window's gone. But just so you know, for the future, as I think, I thought, it was pretty well established in our community that we do publish by legal notice all of our announcements, and we do now put them on our website.
Additionally, I want to address something that was raised by Mr. Lowry, and I want to address it very directly. And that is all of our office's communications go out to both the Democratic and Republican Party leaders, and they're on the same email. So if you go to Republican Chair Frank Agavino, or you go to Democratic Chair, the Chair, Ms. Guiney, Colleen Guiney, you'll hear the same thing. And that is that these emails get blasted out to them, and they're both, and I do it purposely so that they can see all the communications that go out. This office never, ever, unless we're responding to an inquiry, like, hey, is this polling place going to be able to open up because we heard that there's an issue with construction coming up or something like that. But when we initiate communications, we always direct it to on a bipartisan basis.
But if
So-
the Republican or Democrat leaders can pass that on to the relevant party here, in this case, Edgemont Township Republican Party.
Well,
then-
you know,
and I'm not sure if they have an obligation to do that, but you're looking at.
but I didn't, but the suggestion that I contacted Edgemont Democrats is false.
Original ballots from Edgemont Township, it didn't concern the.
I understand, but I'm saying that isn't, that's why we publish the legal notice as well as the notice on our website, is so that everybody has access. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Jackson.
Good morning.
Morning.
We have received 3 campaign finance waivers for your consideration. The first one we have is Friends of Edward Brown. And he states that he was sick with COVID and that was the reason for his lateness. He had owed cycle 5 fees of $40. We also have candidate Malcolm Yates, who stated that he incorrectly classified himself on his petition form, and that was a mistake for his filing his cycle too late. He owed a total of $250. And then we have a candidate, Matthew Dadich, who was told by the leader of his town that he didn't have to file, which was incorrect. He did indeed have to file because he didn't sign the waiver on his petition form. So he owed cycle 2, 3, and 5 reports for a total of $650.
And is there a recommendation, Ms. Jackson?
Yes, I would recommend to waive these candidates and one committee due to their understanding of the campaign finance laws.
Okay, and that's been corrected with them, I assume?
Yes, it has been.
So we won't see them again? Do you hope?
Let's hope we do not.
Madam Chair, I would move to approve the 3 requests as presented.
Okay.
I'm
I
gonna
would second.
All right, sorry, Mr. Albert, there's like a delay in your sound, so I end up talking over you. All right, I've seconded that, although I think Mr. Albert's thirded it. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
None opposed, that motion passes. Thank you, Ms. Jackson.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Parks, is this you, the status on the potential recounts, or is it Mr. Allen?
I think that's Mr. Allen.
We saw today,
Oh, sorry, I skipped him. I've skipped it. I'm sorry. Poll worker pay consideration. You had it.
Oh, yeah, we can't skip that.
No.
hey, we generally speaking, we have poll workers who not only do a sufficient job, who do an extraordinary job and take every effort possible to make sure they get everything right. Once in a great while, we have a poll worker who does not. They do not make any effort to return the materials timely, or they cause a disruption at the polling place when they should be serving the voters, or they cause the process to be upset in some way, either with a late opening or what have you. And I would like the board's authorization to be able to dock pay in those rare occasions when we have someone who clearly did not serve successfully, which is our definition. You know, you pass the test and you serve successfully. That's the that's what qualifies individuals for poll worker pay. Again, I would make the argument that they don't get paid enough, but in certain instances, rare instances, we do need to send a clear and direct message that misbehavior of any kind is not going to be tolerated.
And just for the record, maybe I don't know whether we need to, how much we need to announce about the person or the issue, but I understand you're recommending that the pay be docked for a particular poll worker for.
Well, the matter is still under investigation, so I'm reluctant to.
I don't know if we have a motion that, I don't know if we have.
Yeah, that's true.
Enough information to, yeah. Okay. All right.
If you want to hold off on that, that's fine. But
Yeah,
the checks
I
do
would
get cut
recommend,
in a rapid,
yeah,
process.
I would recommend we hold off because I think there's going to be some required legal analysis as well under what the language of the code permits and doesn't permit in this area.
All right.
Just one that.
There was an instance that you forwarded to me
Okay.
that we're still reviewing.
Well, that was just a complaint I received. I have no idea.
Well, that's being looked into,
Right.
and if it's founded, then there would be consideration for
Yeah,
how to handle it.
I take it with a grain of salt. I mean, I got a complaint from somebody and I forwarded it to Mr. Allen.
No, yeah, and
you know.
he takes it with all the seriousness that complaints are due.
Yeah. I mean, expect he would investigate. We're coming back, aren't we? I mean,
Yes.
in the near future. So, I mean, that's.
So yeah, we're going to be back on Tuesday if everything goes as planned. So the next item, potential recounts. We did receive a filing in the Bethel Township Supervisor contest that the unofficial numbers currently without any provisional ballots they're 28 votes apart. We're also monitoring Brookhaven Borough Council, which is a contest that's 23 votes apart out of 2,300 votes approximately cast, or 2,300 ballots rather. Edgemont Township Supervisor, as was noted just a few minutes ago, we're monitoring that because that's 13 votes apart. And then closest of all, currently Glen Olden Borough Council, we have a contest that the two candidates it's a vote for four. So the fourth place and fifth place are currently separated by 10 votes. So I offer that also as a reminder to the voting public that anyone tells you that your vote really doesn't count. Well, we have prima facie evidence of that your vote very much does count.
And so the deadline for filing those petitions is what day?
Well, that depends.
Maybe Mr. Parks could walk us through the whole process.
I prefer not to because that's the job of lawyers for the candidates and parties.
No, we're coming to the end of this. Let's just say this. We have one petition formally filed, is my understanding.
Yes.
And does it appear to be properly presented?
There are some structural issues with it, but I've been in touch with counsel and we're trying to work out essentially a stipulation to proceed with a recount in an agreed upon fashion, notwithstanding some of the technical defects associated with it.
Okay, and will that be presented to us at the meeting?
Well, it
Certainly.
depends on how quickly a recount can be accomplished or whether now I've had some preliminary discussions that particular race could be recounted after the whole certification process, because right now, as you can imagine, the staff's quite busy with certification related issues. And I'm waiting to hear back a definitive response to that, but I'll say that it wasn't immediately rejected as a possible solution. And you'll recall in the past, we've done similar things where we would certify all but a particular race that was subject to a recount, complete the recount, and then have a certification of that race separately on a later schedule. And that's what I hope we'll see here. And from all early indications, this is a matter that would only involve a court role in the most perfunctory sense of there was a filing with the court. If past recount indications or any or experience or any indications, we could presumably, avoid any kind of major proceeding in a court here. It would just be a matter of completing the recount, having all the parties involved participate and see that process, and then the results, the result. And in the past, that's been sufficient to, have either actions withdrawn or a joint agreed upon stipulation entered. And I would like to believe that's what we'll have with this as well.
Okay, so more to come on this. It's just the fact that at least one has been filed. Okay. And then the next board meeting is next Tuesday as well, right?
Yes, we've penciled in the certification meeting for 9 a.m. on Tuesday, the 21st. So that would be the Tuesday right before Thanksgiving, and staff deserves a break.
And that would be 9 o'clock. I'm sorry.
That would be 9 a.m. Did I say otherwise?
This is why I emailed you last night, Judge, checking, because I think with the email invitation that we got is 8.
Oh, that's leave for. I always make that appointment, that calendar appointment, 8 AM.
I actually appreciate it because it covers my calendar so that.
And
no
I
one
want
schedules
it to
meeting
set off
over.
the alarm.
Okay.
So the meeting starts at 9, but it's a,
You want me to leave at 8 o'clock? That's a suggestion.
yeah,
We
or
definitely.
at least think about leaving.
That change. Mr. Allen, I may need to appear remotely just for your awareness of that one.
All right.
All right, Mr. Alberts, Mr. McLean, anything else?
No, but as long as.
Nothing further.
Quorum.
Are you able to be in person on the 21st?
I am.
I could be if I had to be, but I need to travel for the holidays. Okay, we'll make sure. All right. Anything else? Then with that, we're
At this
adjourned.
time.
Okay, thank you very much. We're
Thank
adjourned.
you, everyone.